Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to the stream. Last night for my run of this thing is so irritating. There we go. Last night, my 4 streams in a row. I am so tired. I cannot deal with this summer anymore. It's driving me insane. It's making me very tired. So pardon my lack of energy. Hopefully I will gain it as I'm reading. We'll see how it goes. Honestly, don't need my headphones anymore because every time I play music in the background of when I'm reading, it either distracts me or when I upload it to YouTube, even though I'm paying for license free music, it puts up a violation, a copyright violation. I don't know what to do about that. I don't think there's anything I can do about that. I don't fight it. I'm just like, whatever, dude. So unfortunately, we can't have any music in the background because I have no avenue whatsoever to have free music to play in the background. Twitch lets me play stuff. YouTube doesn't. I don't know. I even have to go back into videos and, edit out music and stuff. So, all right. We are getting close to the end of Dawn of the Aspects. Hopefully we can actually finish it tonight. If not, we'll have to do a bit of it next Sunday, and then we could do War of the Scaleborn, which is next in reading order of like chronological timelines. So, all right. We can already activate Windows thing down there. They want me to go to Windows 11. Yeah, that ain't happening, fools. Or like a computer that works. I'm just saying. Don't mind me, I'm just taking some meds I didn't take this morning. So, yeah, it's been a weekend. But yeah, I have a full version of Windows on here. They just want me to go into Windows 11 and I ain't doing it. So, take a second. No. Alright, we left off that Caligos is losing more of his willpower to this Titan artifact, and Jaina's trying to figure out what it is that he's messing with. And she's very certain she found it in one of her old books, yet it seems to be hidden magically from her, that she can't find the relevant information about what this artifact is, what it's doing, and how to turn it off. Okay? That's where I left off. So, finish up taking my stuff and we'll start. I didn't mention I'm so dried out from this weather. It's ridiculous. All right. Oh yeah, and then back in time, uh, what is her dragon's name? Telenixa. She activated her plan to go after Galakron. Failed miserably. She is dead. Sarah still has it in her head that maybe they can do something that wasn't outright murder Galakron. Yet we don't know what kind of state Galakron is in. Now, the way they describe Galakron at this point is that he has different appendages and such sticking out of him, but he has also got all random eyes that seem to look around for him. Now that sounds like a follower of N'Zoth. So it's very possible that he made a deal with the Void Lord N'Zoth to become the dragon instead of, the Titans trying to get a foothold. It's, another ploy of the Void Lords trying to become commanders and permanent residents of Azeroth to corrupt the world soul inside. Um, I don't know if they're going to touch on it in here because I don't know if they ever got to that point, but we'll find out. All right, I'm gonna start. Kalik shared Malagos's consternation. He also shared his host's decision to attack without hesitation. Malagos started to exhale. No! Ysera collided with him from the side. Malagos's frost shot deep into the cave. The undead reached for him, or tried to. It also attempted to exhale in turn, but now Malagos saw that its mouth was bound by a strong vine found growing on rocks facing the vicinity. The paws were also bound. Proto-dragons, as a species, did not use tools of any sort. They had hardly been sentient long enough to develop such interests, and in general did not even need them. However, Ysera had adapted quite well to finding a use for what Malagos would have considered food for some grazers. As his eyes became better attuned to the fainter light, Malagos saw that this animated corpse had once had a hide the same brilliant color of that as Alexstrasza. Clutch brother. Before he could state what appeared obvious, Alexstrasza leaned near. It is not him. We knew this one, but it is not our clutch brother. Ysera had already lost interest in Malagos, her focus on the undead. She guided the fiend back, all the while murmuring to it. Found her with one like this before, Alexstrasza admitted. Another of our family. She cannot find our clutch brother, and so helps other family. 1 second. Sure. Okay, everything's going. Just checking things. Don't mind me. Screen flipping and all that. Let's see here. Malagos had not given much thought to Ysera's earlier obsession, but now suspected that if she had not been able to find the remains there. Alright, I'm tired, sorry. Malagos had not given much thought to Ysera's earlier obsession, but now suspected that if she had not been able to find the remains, they had likely been dragged off by any number of scavengers or moved by the weather. It was still possible that he was now one of the not living, but Kalik's host very much doubted it. All of that, of course, did not explain what Malagos saw here, or how it happened to be so very near the site of Talaninx's disastrous defeat. Galakron's roar erupted once more. This time, though, it sounded far away. The smell, Alexstrasza explained. The smell of the not living smothers ours. Galakron only smells death nearby. That at least answered one vital question for Malagos and Kalik. But that is not why not living is here. No, I had a little hand in that, another voice said. Alexstrasza did not appear startled that there was a fifth figure in the cave, a fact made even more interesting by the speaker being none other than Tyr. Something that did not surprise Malagos when he looked upon the cloaked and hooded form was that Tyr was now several feet taller than before and much wider. Even then, Malagos and Kalik could not help feeling that Tyr only wore this size because it was convenient for the moment. He still radiated a presence far greater than his current height indicated. This is only a slight reflection of him, Kalik vaguely recalled. He struggled to remember more, but his own time had become fragments of scenes that were harder and harder to think of as fact. Jaina's face was the strongest bond remaining, and on occasion even she briefly faded from his mind. He was interrupted in his attempt to strengthen his few memories by the undead's muffled hiss. The animated corpse tried to move forward again, but Ysera blocked its path. She continued to speak quietly to the creature as if it were actually her missing clutch brother. She must give this up, Malagos finally muttered. It helped draw her and thus her sister here, Tyr remarked, in that her desire to save her missing sibling has merit. I had a different intention when I drew this creature to this cave early on, but fate appeared to have another purpose. Saw it when we fled from Galacrond, Alexstrasza said. Ysera wanted to return to Galacrond, wanted to try again to speak peace. She peered at her sister and the undead. Told her I saw our clutch brother. She believed. We followed to here. Tyr grunted. It was a variation on my plan. He did not bother to tell them that what that variation was, even though the proto-dragons cocked their head in confusion. It saved your lives. Now we only have to figure out how to save the world. Neltharion knows Thormu, Malagos muttered. They are not saved. Alexstrasza's eyes widened. In all the excitement concerning her sister, she had forgotten about the other two males. Galacrond, are they? I do not know. We flew to the clouds, split up, saw nothing, heard nothing. The urge to return to the outside and head off in search of the missing pair grew strong enough that Malagos took a step toward the entrance. Offer. You. Come on. Bye. Very cute. No, don't do that. Bots are getting bold again. It says message deleted by moderator, and I still see it on my damn screen. Oh well. Wait. Tyr passed by both proto-dragons. He stepped up to the entrance but did not proceed. For a moment the two-legged creature stared out in the open. Alexstrasza used the delay to tell Malagos. He came from nowhere, said he knew you, offered help. She shook her head. I believed all. Did not question Tyr. While Malagos was glad to hear that he would not have to explain or defend Tyr, that subject did not concern him so much at that moment. Instead, he could not help but still being bothered by Ysera and her horrific charge. Alexstrasza's sister went on speaking softly to the corpse. Tyr said, let this be, the fire-orange female muttered. How long? Not said. Not good. We cannot stay here. They were interrupted by the return of Tyr. Galacrond is still in the region, but he is taking a path to the southwest. If he keeps that direction, he'll soon be far enough away that you can go in search of your comrades. Malagos snorted. We'll find them. What about her? Tyr followed his gaze to Ysera. There's a facet to her that must be encouraged, must be explored. I feel that this is significant, if not for now, then for the future. The future was a concept only recently appreciated by Malagos and other proto-dragons, having once been creatures who had purely existed for the moment at hand. Now that concept seemed a very fragile one. Galacrond may be the future. His remark did not appear to strike Tyr as dramatically as the proto-dragon thought. Instead of solemnly nodding, Tyr smiled slightly. I think I've finally chosen well. The comment most mystified and infuriated Calyx's host. Riddles, Wingless Tyr talks riddles. Proto-dragons dying. And no one knows that better than I, the two-legged being answered, much too calmly for Malagos's taste. No one feels more responsible than I. I should have watched. I knew the others were beyond caring. I should have watched. But even I grew distracted. The animated corpse shows at that moment to begin a new tirade. Why it had been stirred up was quickly apparent. Ysera had dared to undo the mouth. What she hoped to accomplish, neither Malagos nor Kalik could guess, but what she almost earned for her decision was a bite across the throat. Only her quick reflexes kept Ysera from a mortal wound. A red rage overtook Malagos. He shoved back Ysera and attacked the undead. With its paws still bound, its remaining defenses were its slavering jaws and its horrific mist. Malagos shifted to the monster's right. The undead, unable to turn well, could not bring its head around far enough to reach him. Malagos ripped into the dry neck, easily tearing through the rotting flesh and cracking bone. It was enough to cause the neck to collapse, taking the head with it. With blackened blood slowly dripping from the savage wound, the torso continued to twitch. Still caught up in its fury, Malagos ripped open the chest. That appeared to be sufficient. The body quieted, then slumped. Kalik's mind also swirled with rage, although to a lesser degree. He fought against the desire for blood and flesh, even as a voice tried to reach through the haze that Malagos's thoughts had become. The icy blue male turned on Ysera. She met Malagos's gaze squarely and began talking to him in a tone like the one she had used with the corpse. Malagos at first sneered, only interested in her life. He smelled its freshness and his hunger grew. Kalik understood that his host had fallen prey to the bite from the earlier undead and doubted that Malagos would be able to shake himself out of it this time. Worse, Malagos towered over Ysera, who made no move to flee. Then a quiet voice penetrated Malagos's thoughts, like something out of a dream. It gently touched some remnant of sanity left in Kalik's host and urged it forward. Kalik felt Malagos's hunger begin to subside. His reason started to take dominance again. We are your friends, Malagos. At first, Kalik believed the voice belonged to Tyr, for not only did it have an otherworldly quality to it, but who else would have the ability to draw reasons back from the madness? However, as the voice repeated itself, he caught its feminine facets. It was Ysera's voice. With the subsiding of the blood rage, Malagos's vision cleared. Now both Kalik and his host could make out that Ysera was speaking. While that certainly made sense, it had been impossible for even Kalik to identify her under such circumstances. You do not want to do this. You are one who fights for us, not against us. Listening through Malagos, Kalik noticed how much more succinctly Ysera spoke. She was more intelligent, if also more impulsive, than other proto-dragons. Kalik wondered if her small size and inability to fight, as well as many normal proto-dragons, had contributed to her need to hone her intellect even more than most of her kind. Malagos finally nodded. I am well. But for the first time, Tyr was disturbed. Barging past Ysera, the two-legged being angrily peered at Malagos. You've been bitten. The hunger is within you. Alexstrasza joined her sister. The elder female appeared almost as dismayed as Tyr. Ysera, on the other hand, looked very interested and at the same time disappointed. Could have saved them, Ysera muttered. Did not have to dive in that cave. Both Malagos and Kalik recalled the infected proto-dragons buried alive by Talanixa. Kalik doubted that those poor creatures, so much farther gone than even Malagos, could have been turned back to sanity as his host had been. Still, he felt Malagos's guilt grow at the thought that perhaps somehow he could have helped Ysera in that regard. Tyr ignored Ysera, his attention fully on studying Malagos for any sign of the hunger returning. I've seen others, none other fought it down. How long has it been since you were bitten? Several suns. Tyr's eyes, so very different from those of proto-dragons, narrowed further. That long, and you haven't succumbed. That bespeaks a strong will, although evident not strong enough. She kept you from falling too deep in the hunger. Malagos straightened. Not happen again. To Kalec's surprise, his host spoke with the utmost certainty. The dragon could sense a change in Malagos, a change in great part the result of Ysera's effort to guide him back to sanity. Tyr did not look convinced. He raised a hand to Malagos. The hand glowed white. Malagos instinctively retreated. Alexstrasza hissed. Only Ysera appeared unperturbed. Even though Malagos had seen Tyr appear and disappear and knew he had amazing powers, it was another thing to have those powers focused at him. Only great restraint kept the icy blue male from defending himself. Cannot sense the taint. Either you have buried it so deep that it should never resurface, or you have purged it somehow from your body and mind entirely. Tyr looked back at Ysera. One must never overestimate appearances, it seems. Alexstrasza's sister betrayed no evidence that she heard Tyr's compliment. Rather, the slighter female moved back to the ravaged corpse. She muttered something, then began to mourn it as Malagos recalled Alexstrasza mourning the remains of their actual clutch brother. Tyr tolerated this for a very short time. There are other lives that can be saved. I think it's best that we do what we can for those, including your missing friends. But there is still Galakron, Alexstrasza pointed out. Even if he is gone now, he will always hunt us. That is why we must hunt him instead. Malagos was not alone in eyeing Tyr with some suspicion. We hunt him. Talonixa hunted Galakron. Speak with Talonixia, Tyr. Your point is well taken, Proto-Dragon. Still, this time will be different. Kalec's host cocked his head. How? Tyr reached into his cloak and removed what only Kalec recognized, but even Malagos and the sisters understood was a weapon of some sort. Tyr might lack claws and sharp teeth, but he wielded the blunt-ended thing with an ease and skill that the proto-dragons could appreciate. As for Kalec, he had seen many a warhammer in his time. But even the sturdiest of those, used by the dwarves especially, paled in comparison to the huge weapon Tyr held, a weapon that Kalec and his host felt was of great power than it appeared, like the hooded figure himself. Because I will not stand by this time. When you face Galakron, I will be at your side. He returned the hammer to the confines of his cloak, the weapon seeming to vanish into a void rather than simply hanging at Tyr's side. As astounding as that was to Malagos, for Kalec and the act revealed another more urgent sight. Hanging next to where the hammer had vanished was none other than the artifact. Kalec expected to watch the cloak again obscure the bane of his existence, but to his shock, Tyr brought forth the artifact. The proto-dragons peered at the object, Malagos's utter bafflement clearly matching that of his sisters. Various explanations ran through Malagos's mind. An egg, rock, piece of star, but none approached what Kalec already knew about the insidious relic. Tyr held out the artifact, which looked to Kalec as if it was smaller than he recalled, and held it toward Malagos. In contrast with the lavender color the blue dragon was familiar with from his own time, now the artifact glowed faint white, and only in the direction of Kalec's host. Malagos grunted, but before he could react, the glow ceased. Tyr turned to Ysera and Alexstrasza. Again, the artifact glowed faintly. Having already seen nothing happen to Malagos, neither sister so much as blinked. Kalec wanted to shout questions, but Malagos asked only one of the many the blue dragon sought the answer to. What did you do? Try to ensure some future. It was as vague as a response as Kalec had expected. He would have followed up with a pointed query, but Malagos was not of the same mind. His concerns were more immediate to the overall situation. We go now. Find the others. Tyr hid the artifact again, leaving Kalik to fume silently. Yes, we will find them. Galakron's roar shook the cavern suddenly close. Heavy chunks of rock broke from the ceiling, and if not for Alexstrasza quickly covering her head with her wings, she would have been wounded. Ysera and Malagos were also pelted, but not as badly. The rocks seemed to fall around Tyr without touching him. Still, he did not take the incident lightly. Scowling, he steered the three back from the entrance. His decision proved providential. A major section of the ceiling there crumbled a breath later. Did not bury them alive, but it meant that to escape, they would have to crawl out one at a time. And out there, Galakron continued to rage. Something has brought him back here, Tyr rasped. Your friends, perhaps. Whatever the reason, Galakron appeared determined to stay in the region. The ground shook again and again, creating more showers of rock, but thus far no new collapses. All four, 5 including Kalik, knew that their luck could not last much longer. Tyr started back to the entrance, only to have Malagos charge past him. The male proto-dragon thrust out his snout just enough to see what was happening. Galakron chose that moment to land. The new tremors shocked the landscape. The monstrous proto-dragon's head whipped back and forth in search of something. Kalik and his host both noted that Galakron looked amused. Kalik had seen that expression before in such predators. The behemoth was toying with his prey, whatever it was. A moment later, that prey also appeared. Not at all to Malagos and Kalik's surprise. It was Neltharion. The charcoal gray male dived down from behind Galakron. Neltharion unleashed another roar, aimed at the base of Galakron's skull. The misshapen leviathan shook from the force of the shockwave and fell forward to the ground. Neltharion laughed and came around to attack again. This being led to his death, Tyr said from behind Malagos. I knew him to be rash, but not suicidal. Several of the eyes along Galakron's torso had been observing Neltharion the entire time. The smaller male reached the location Galakron evidently waited for. He twisted his head around and opened his mouth to exhale. A thick column of sand shot down his gullet. A fit of coughing overtook Galakron as he suddenly had to fight for breath. The massive proto-dragon struggled to dislodge the sand from his throat. Another smaller figure dropped down just beside Neltharion. Nosdormu hissed at Galakron, a taunt that the hacking beast failed to notice. Excellent coordination, Tyr roared. So I was right about all of you. Malagos failed to see what so cheered the two-legged being, and Galak had to agree. Yes, the pair had outmaneuvered Galakron, but he was hardly defeated. Some impulse drove Malagos out into the open. He was through the half-ruined entrance before anyone could stop him. Alexstrasza called after him, but he did not hesitate. Kalik felt Malagos's intense sense of loyalty urged the icy blue male into the fray. Snout down, Galakron finally began to dislodge chunks of solidified sand. His breathing took on a more normal rate. He started to look up again. Malagos exhaled. As Nosdormu had done, Malagos aimed at the gullet. At the last moment, Galakron sensed him. However, in turning to face Malagos, Galakron only gave him a choicer target. The frost hit the same eye that Neltharion had earlier attacked. By itself, the frost might not have slowed Galakron, but it aggravated the injured eye. Hissing, the enormous proto-dragon shut both eyes. Of course, that did not leave him sightless. Several of the extra eyes now glared at Malagos. Yet no sooner had those orbs fixed on Kalik's host than the fire assailed the shut ones. Alexstrasza soared over Malagos, the plume of flame she exhaled continuing. Her attack kept the main orbs from reopening and drew the other eyes from Malagos. Neltharion chose then to attack some of the extra eyes. He first roared at them, and then, when he was able to get near enough, he tore away 2 He tore away two in successive swipes of his hind claws, but the reckless male failed to pay sufficient attention to some of the extra limbs. Perhaps seeing them as little other than useless growths, Neltharion let his tail come too close to one dangling leg. The paw seized his tail and held on with a tight grip. Neltharion tried to back away, which only brought him near another paw. The second grabbed one of his hind legs. Galakrond opened his eyes. Mouth widening, he turned to swallow the captured morsel. Malagos and Alexstrasza tried to draw his attention again, but Galakrond cared only to devour Neltharion. Their attacks, now striking mostly the scale hide, did little more than cause their foe to twitch slightly as his jaws neared the charcoal-gray male. A shadow swept over Malagos, immense enough to make him think that perhaps another Galakrond came up behind him. He started to look over his shoulder, but the shape moved so quickly that both he and Kalik had no time to ascertain what it was before it reached Galakrond. A thick form that Kalik initially identified as a fist as large as a full-grown proto-dragon hit Galakrond on the side of the jaw opposite from Neltharion. It hit with such force that the Miamoth stumbled away from the blow. Only as the shape receded did both Kalik and his host catch enough of a glimpse to see it that it was not a fist, but the head of a hammer that had made the blow. A hammer identical to what Tyr had wielded, but many times the size of the one they had seen earlier. And while Malagos had missed it, Kalik had noticed that there was a hand gripping the hammer, a hand also much larger than previously seen. But just as the hammer withdrew, Malagos' attention was caught by Ysera, who darted dangerously close to the briefly stunned Galakrond's jaw. However, instead of seeking the gullet, Ysera rose before Galakrond's nostrils and exhaled. Galakrond grunted. He hesitated. The paws holding onto Neltharion seemed to lose control. He pulled away and fled from Galakrond. As he did, Alexstrasza and Ysera also turned away. Flee! To the south! Tyr called from somewhere beyond the icy blue male's sight. Tyr's resounding voice well matched his titanic proportions, which made his sudden command more shocking to Malagos. All appearances were that they were at last winning. But as he thought that, Galakrond began to stir again. Kalik's host veered away. He saw his companions, Nozdormu included, awaited him in the south. Of Tyr there was no sign. Malagos picked up the pace. Behind him, Galakrond roared. Malagos flew faster. He joined the others as they raced on. Tyr? Malagos called. In response, a sound that echoed like thunder rocked them from the direction of Galakrond. A second later, the Leviathan roared again, but this time from farther away. Malagos almost halted, but Alexstrasza shook her head. Tyr says fly south. Keep flying. With much regret, he obeyed. He did not entirely understand this being called Tyr, but he recognized that the two-legged creature knew far more than he or any of the others did. Their hopes of defeating Galakrond rested greatly on Tyr. Tyr, who at this moment risked himself to help the five escape. And for Kalik, who was forced wherever his host went, despite the fact that he would have flown in the opposite direction. It was the same Tyr who carried with him the artifact and the blue dragon's fading hope that he would free himself with these visions with his mind intact. Small pause. Jaina glared at the offending books. She had exhausted a repertoire of spells designed for such delicate searches to no avail. Now the Archmage considered stronger measures, her only hesitation being that Modera or someone else would certainly notice her presence then. Still, every second lost might also mean further danger to Kalik. She had to take the risk of discovery. Her mind made up, Jaina began casting, then halted. Atop one bookcase sat the skull of an ancient, savage reptile that she had inherited with a number of unusual and arcane objects from her predecessor, Ronan. While in itself meant nothing to Jaina, it caught her mind to shift back abruptly to the huge skeleton in her encounter with Monique. She saw again how the Tonka drew the pattern. Only at this moment did Jaina ponder the fact that the Tonka had a very precise memory for a symbol like nothing she would have seen before. At the time, the Archmage had chalked it up to the focused nature of Bunique's kind, but now she wondered if she had been something more. "Were you really a Tonka?" Jaina asked the distant Bunique. "I shouldn't have believed in coincidence." Jaina drew the symbol in the air. She then turned it about so that she looked at it as if it had been drawn by the hunter. "What a fool I've been," the Archmage blurted. She bit her lip, then simply prayed that no one had heard her. She eyed the reverse symbol, seeing it anew. Had she paid more attention when first seeing it by the skeleton, Jaina would also have noticed that turning it revealed a different and obvious meaning. Turned this way, the symbol was also a key, or rather, the key. Jaina cast the reverse symbol over the original tome. The Archmage watched as it sank into the book. The lavender globe faded not only from the book in question, but also from the entire collection. Jaina seized the thick tome and began flipping through the pages. There, when she had expected to find the information she needed, she finally found it. The Archmage carefully read over the passage. When together, the two parts were more than the sum of their individual measure, their power magnified. Archmage Wendell suggested that there were also other combinations that the pair could make, but that the immense time since their creation had caused some of those combinations to function in error. Jaina shut the book. Yes, that must be it. Voices arose outside her chambers. Jaina quietly swore at her outbursts. She should have known that Modera would have someone listening for any sign of her return. But discovery mattered no longer. Jaina believed that she had what she needed. The Archmage set down the book and vanished. She materialized a few seconds later just beyond the magical boundaries of the Nexus, the humming accompanying her teleportation spell fading away even as she registered her location. Jaina frowned upon seeing where she had appeared. The Archmage was far from her intended goal. She cast another spell and vanished again. Jaina rematerialized in the same location. Staring at the Nexus, the Archmage attempted a different tact. This time, she simply tried to probe what was currently happening. The probe failed to breach the Nexus's protective wards. Having entered the sanctum just recently, Jaina believed that Kalik had adjusted the wards to keep someone or something out. That was followed with the concern that he had wanted her specifically to be kept from entering. He had already sought to keep his troubles from her, and it could be reasonably assumed that this change in the wards had been done with that intention in mind. The trouble was, Jaina believed that she held Kalik's only hope of being freed from whatever the artifact was doing to him. If he had sealed the Nexus off, it was possible he had condemned himself. "No, I will not lose you." Jaina cast another spell, this one draping over the entire field of wards. She looked for some fault, however slight, of which she could take advantage. Unfortunately, she found none. The blue dragons themselves aside, few alive understood the complexities of the Nexus's wards as well as Jaina Proudmoore did. Aware of the general matrix, Jaina sought out the key points. She did not seek the weaknesses, but to find alterations. By understanding what had been changed, the Archmage might be able to see how she could adjust it to her desire. But what Jaina discovered when she located the key points was not what she expected. Kalik had not made these alterations. The same energy signature she had noted in the artifact now permeated the Nexus's defensive network. At first, the Archmage stood daunted, but then an idea occurred to her. She recreated the symbol and keeping it reversed as she had done with the books, incorporated it into her next probe of the key wards. There was resistance, but the symbol finally imposed itself on the altered wards. As it did, the artifact's influence on the area faded. Encouraged, Jaina probed deeper. The alteration reconstructed itself, in the process rejecting her spell work from the wards. The force with which it reversed matter The force with which it reversed matters struck Jaina's mind hard. Gasping, the Archmage fell to one knee. Her head throbbed. However, her initial frustration at this setback quickly changed to curiosity. What she had sensed was no personal purpose on the part of the artifact. It had simply restored an area that had been disrupted. There had been no malice, no intentional attack on the Archmage. Once the area had been returned to its previous state, the artifact's effort had ceased. Standing, Jaina grimly smiled. She had a better idea of what she faced. Next, she had to learn its limits, and whether those limits were greater than her own. With Knaak in her thoughts, the Archmage once more recreated the symbol. She then made a second, a third, and so on, until within the space of a few breaths, scores of the reversed image hovered before her. "Let's see what happens now," Jaina murmured. "Let's see what happens when you have to readjust everything." She sent her army of glowing symbols into the air. They hovered together for a moment, then spread out, circling the expanse of the Nexus in its unseen protective wards. When they reached where Jaina wanted them to be, the Archmage had them pause just beyond the wards. Heightening her senses, she took one last look at how the wards were arranged, then sent a sigil hurtling toward each. As the reversed symbols touched the wards, the Nexus erupted in an explosion of white and lavender energy. The 5 proto-dragons alighted on a set of sharp ridges along the side of a wide, stark peak. All were extremely exhausted, and had Galakron chosen that moment to attack them, Malygos had little doubt that he and his friends would have been easy morsels for the behemoth. Knaak, experiencing Malygos's weariness and foul mood, could not help but think the same. For several minutes, the 5 simply crouched where they perched, caught in their own thoughts, but all clearly having the same thoughts. The devastation wrought by Galakron had begun to sink in, as had the fact that they had seemed to be the only ones left to face him. More and more, the immensity of that was becoming apparent. The mountain wind howled, but Malygos suddenly heard another sound mixed in with it. Stirring, the icy blue male listened, but noted only the wind now. Knaak's host saw that Ysera also listened. She did not look Malygos's way, but rather at where 2 mountains to the east seemed as if they fell towards each other. Again there came a brief sound. This time Malygos recognized the mournful hiss of a proto-dragon. Ysera flew off toward the sound. The others took notice of her action, but evidently had not heard the cry. Malygos immediately followed, with the rest in pursuit. Ysera dived in between the 2 mountains. Malygos pushed to keep up with her, amazed that the weaker female now had more strength than he did. The yellowish proto-dragon entered a shadowed area that reminded Knaak and his host too much of the very region they had just left. Visions of animated corpses rose in both minds. Alexstrasza's sister vanished into the shadows. Malygos slowed slightly, then entered. Barely he had done so when another proto-dragon rose in front of him. Despite the shadows, it was clear to Malygos that this was a living creature, not one of the undead. The 2 collided, but not because the other proto-dragon, a young male, sought battle. Malygos' supposed opponent squawked in fear as he tried to untangle himself. A third proto-dragon, Alexstrasza, joined from behind Malygos. Ysera's sibling aided Malagos in pinning the young proto-dragon against one rocky wall. As they did, Ysera joined them. No! He was only startled. Let him go. The captured male frantically looked from Malagos to Ysera and back again. He let out a slow whine. Only then did Malagos realize that this one was one of the lesser proto-dragons, one of those that had not made the leap to intelligence. From behind Ysera rose more whining. Malagos caught sight of several shapes moving about in the back. Neltharion and Nosdormu landed near them. At the same time, Alexstrasza released her hold on the captured proto-dragon. Malagos did the same. The young male immediately rushed back behind Ysera. He vanished among the other shadowy forms, all of which grew even more agitated. What is this? Neltharion muttered. Ysera turned to the shadows. Malagos and the others finally followed. The agitated forms turned out to be a motley collection of proto-dragons, which Kalik and his hosts saw included mostly the lesser ones, but also a few of the obviously more intelligent. Whichever they were, they shared a tremendous anxiety. Among them, Malagos spotted two whom he recognized from the doomed charge. They looked even more disheveled than the lesser proto-dragons, and in some manner also more anxious. Eyeing the smarter ones, Malagos came to the conclusion that they were probably all from the charge. Galakrond comes! Galakrond comes! The silver-blue female cried without warning. The assembled survivors grew even more agitated. No, Galakrond! Neltharion roared with impatience. No, Galakrond! Quiet! They quieted, but only out of a more immediate fear of the charcoal gray male. Neltharion's outburst also greatly shook Ysera. She placed herself between the unfortunates and Neltharion. You be quiet. Quiet! Startled, Neltharion clamped his mouth shut and backed down. Ysera, her eyes widening by the second, turned to the shivering proto-dragons. All good, she continued in a calmer tone. No, Galakrond. All good. Her audience became less restive, but did not completely calm. Kalik, observing all, could hardly blame them. Those who had been part of Teleneex's campaign would live with the horror of the debacle for the rest of their existence. Very possibly a short time unless something changed. So many dead, Ysera muttered. So many dead. Alexstrasza came to her side. Sister, Galakrond, we must... I want to make sure I got this page right. Okay. Kalik's world turned on its head. The vision changed to darkness with a suddenness that jarred the blue dragon as none of the previous shifts had. He felt as if his mind were being torn in 1,000 different directions. What at first sounded like the rapid beating of his own heart pounding in his head quickly became a steady noise that he realized originated from beyond his ears. In understanding that, Kalik also understood that he was somewhat back in his body. Why he had not completely left the vision for the present, the blue dragon could not say. Kalik tried to move, but it was as still as if he was part of young Malagos. Kalik had no sense of his legs and arms, no sense of any part of his body except that if he could hear the pulsating, then he did have ears. Then a distinct shape caught his attention. Kalik found himself grateful that it also revealed that he still did have eyes. He tried to identify it, but he could only make out that it stood over him. The pulsating increased, again causing him this tremendous strain. He wanted to shut his eyes and hold his hands to his ears, and as if he had done the latter, the beat grew muffled, distant. As the intensity faded, Kalik felt the world slowly try to coalesce around him. With it came some semblance of a form to the shape looming over Kalik. The shape was clad in a hooded cloak like the one Tyr had been wearing. Kalik tried to speak, but no words escaped him. Frustrated, threw all of his will into making some sound. His ears resounded with the bellowing cry of a dragon. His own cry, despite the fact that he woke in his humanoid form. Kalik gritted his teeth and then took satisfaction in not only being able to do that, but also having finally made himself heard. Details started to come into view around the vague form that might be Tyr, details that Kalik recognized from the interior of the Nexus, and among them naturally was the artifact. That it was so nearby did not surprise him. He was relieved to find that the artifact had not sent him flying halfway across Azeroth, but wondered why he still heard the pulsating. There was no reason for the Nexus to have such a sound coursing through it. Yes, some of the wards set off warnings of a magical nature, but this was not one of those alarms. Even as that came to mind, it suddenly occurred to Kalik that the vague form no longer stood over him. He glared at the empty air, then forced himself to his feet. As he did, he sensed the influence of the artifact extending through the entire arrangement of wards, as if it sought to alter everything anew. No. As he fought to focus better, Kalik noticed that there was a difference in the way the artifact's power flowed. It was not simply seeking to alter things, it was attempting to correct abrupt changes made to the wards from the outside. But who would have the audacity? Jaina? He whispered, both hoping it was her and praying it was not. She could not possibly have any idea what was happening within, so Kalik believed. And even if somehow she had gained some knowledge, Jaina risked herself needlessly. There was nothing she could do for Kalik. More fearful for her life than for more fearful. Wow, I can't read today. Sorry. More fearful for her life than for his own fragmenting sanity, Kalik stumbled forward. He heard an ominous rumble echoing through the Nexus, which struck his very core. Galakrond. But it was not possible for the proto-dragon to be there. Kalik knew that with absolute certainty. Yet again he heard Galakrond's distinctive rumble, this time closer than ever. A shadow crossed over Kalik, a vast shadow that only served to verify that what he had heard was indeed fact. However, when he tried to spot the source of that shadow, he could locate no sign. The Nexus shook, but the tremor had nothing to do with shadows of the past. Whatever was affecting the wards from without had caused greater turmoil to his sanctum than Kalik would have expected. More and more he believed that Jaina had come in search of him, and more he feared what the artifact might choose to do with her. Kalik staggered toward the accursed relic. Another shadow moved over it, a smaller one. The vague form stood behind the artifact, its hooded gaze fixed on Kalik. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. "What?" A rasping hiss from his right made Kalik turn. A rasping hiss from his right made Kalik quickly turn. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw one of the undead proto-dragons, but when Kalik sought out the monster, it, like Galakrond, was nowhere to be seen. And neither, when Kalik turned back, was the hooded figure. Fury rising, the former aspect reached for the artifact. Around him, the pulsating grew stronger, deafening. That brought to mind Jaina again, which only further stirred Kalik towards the relic. If only for her, he needed to find some manner by which to stop it. "We must stop him here and now. Any longer, and I fear for this world." Tyr's voice. Kalik knew it very well at this point. He wanted to curse the Keeper, but no word came from the blue dragon's mouth this time. Galakrond's roar filled his ears again. As before, the vast shadow swept over him in the chamber. "I have observed him long enough. I think I have discovered 2 weak points we can exploit." "I do not." Kalik could not finish, nor could he reach the damn relic. He fell to his knees and then, still grasping for the octagonal artifact, pitched forward. But instead of falling, Kalik awoke in what he recognized as the same region where Malagos, Ysera, and the others had come across the survivors from the charge. Concerns about Jaina and the Nexus faded, despite the Blue Dragon's best efforts. His mind and that of the young Malagos melded again. And through his host, Kalik instantly understood that they had not come across the ragged group by chance. Tyr had sent them in that precise direction because he had known that they would discover one of the bands hiding from Galakron's horrific gluttony. If it had not been this one, it would have been another group. And now Tyr stood amongst the five, a hint of weariness in his tone, but weariness mixed with confidence. How he had evaded Galakron, he had apparently not told the proto-dragons. Instead, what he appeared to be doing was organizing Malagos and the others for another mad attempt at taking on Galakron. What was worse to Kalik was that the proto-dragons were listening, especially Ysera. Where is he now? She demanded. The icy peaks over the north ridge. Kalik found the description maddeningly vague, but his host and the rest nodded as if they knew the area very well. An image of the peaks in question briefly formed in Malagos's thoughts. Kalik tried to identify them with some area in Northrend, but the image faded before he could do so. Ysera leaned closer to Tyr. We go now? What does Galakron do now? Nosdormu interjected. What? He sleeps, Tyr answered solemnly. He sleeps deep. Now is the time to attack him. We shall never get a better chance, in fact. None of the proto-dragons, not even Malagos, seemed to notice the slight hesitation at the end of Tyr's statement. Kalik wondered if it meant anything, or if Tyr was simply still exhausted from his own efforts. There is a river nearby, the keeper continued, flush with fish. Go there, eat your fill, then we head north for Galakron. Alexstrasza indicated the huddled survivors. What about these? They would be no help. Neltharion grunted in agreement. He looked at Malagos, who nodded. Kalik's host had no other plan and trusted in Tyr's intelligence. Tyr would lead them to victory. Neltharion spread his wings, but before he could take flight, Tyr reached into his cloak and, to Kalik's tremendous frustration, brought forth the artifact. He held it toward the charcoal-gray male. As before, it glowed, startling Neltharion. Tyr held it near Nosdormu, who simply waited for it to stop glowing. Neltharion snorted at the brown male. We go now? A more impatient Ysera asked. Yes, the river first. I will meet you after. No sooner had Tyr said that than he no longer stood amongst them. Now only Malagos did not react. Kalik did react, although of course no one saw that. And no one evidently saw what he reacted to. Kalik might have been wrong about the earlier hesitation, but he could not have been wrong about the wary gaze Tyr had given before disappearing. Huh. And Kalik was certain he could not be imagining that whatever the reason for the gaze, it warned of a threat not just to Malagos and his friends, but to everything. Yeah, that tells me that he knows that Galakron has been mixing with Void Lords, I think. But to have that big of a creature roaming around with Void Lord power can't be a good thing. So, yeah, I think he knows something about that. Alright. Malagos's feeding left Kalik adrift on his own thoughts, which at last led back to the Blue Dragon's time and Jaina. He knew that his body lay in the Nexus and more than ever believed that she, and she alone, was responsible for what was trying to interfere with the wards affected by the artifact. Jaina, he silently called, hoping that perhaps she would notice him. Jaina! There was no response, and in truth, Kalik had hardly expected one. There was nothing he could do for her except pray that somehow he might be able to find a way from the visions before they consumed his mind. Gaelic could also not comprehend why the visions did not shift from this mundane moment to a more significant one. He was both grateful and concerned when Malagos and the other four suddenly finished their feeding and looked to the sky as if hearing something. The next instant, Calic's host rose into the air and flew north, followed by his companions. Calic did not understand what had alerted Malagos and the others and could not fathom anything from the icy blue male's thoughts, except that they needed to head toward Galakron now. Their surroundings grew chillier as they neared where Tyr had indicated the Leviathan slept. Seeing the landscape from such a height, Calic finally recognized a few points from his own time. They were far into the most desolate of the young world's northern regions. This was nowhere near where Calic knew that Galakron's skeleton lay, and that boded ill for the blue dragon. With Malagos in the lead, the five descended. Calic saw no reason for their doing so unless they feared Galakron spotting them. Then a familiar form materialized on top a ridge. The proto-dragons alighted near Tyr, who seemed as tiny as when Malagos had first met him. Yet more than ever, Calic and his host could sense that what they saw was only a hint of the true Tyr. Calic recalled the brief glimpse he had of the massive hammer and wondered at the full extent of Tyr's power. Certainly all of that power could be needed. All that power would be needed if the six hoped to defeat Galakron. He still sleeps, Tyr announced, his voice reaching the five despite the wind and distance. We must strike quickly. Again, there was an edge to what he said that made Calic suspicious that the proto-dragons were not being told everything. Oh, isn't that a normal thing with the Titans, though? Just saying. Malagos caught that edge too, but did not outwardly reveal anything. Still, Calic was relieved that his host knew to be wary. Now, Tyr continued, his countenance darkening further. This is what At that point, the vision shifted. Here, when matters most concerned Calic, the artifact betrayed him in a new way. He now found himself soaring over another bleak region, surely only moments away from confronting the monstrous foe. Pausing here. Yeah, they've hinted before that there's some things that the Titans are not telling the others about. I mean, for the most part, a lot of us were either their constructs or their little experiments. So, and then there's also this thing about how there's a division in the Titans where half of them are in order and the other half are in wild magic. Now, the wild magic is what is being used in like Ungoro Crater, and there's another area in Northrend where there were it's basically a basin of experiments in creating life, and I tend to think that's where the proto-dragons come from, which technically they should just be called dragons instead of proto-dragons. These are the dragons that are indigenous to Azeroth itself. The dragons that we recognize now and call dragons are something totally different. Those are Titan created. Again. But this time they are created by order, not wild. So if we're just their little experiments or their little helper creatures, yeah, they're not going to tell us everything. They are going to sit there and consider themselves like gods who know better and leave us scurrying around going, what's going on? That's what they've been hinting at recently. So it was, yeah, it's here now too. So okay. The overcast sky combined with the descending sun to create a greater gloom over the already inhospitable landscape. However, from a valley just to the northeast there came a faint, deathly white glow, as if another sun or one of the moons nestled there. That Malagos banked toward it barely a breath later did not at all surprise Kalik. The Blue Dragon's suspicions about Tyr holding something back were verified. Out of the corner of Malagos's eye, Kalik saw the other force spread out. Whatever plan Tyr had explained to the proto-dragons remained ambiguous. There was something about a succession of attacks at the proper signal and then Tyr acting. The vagueness of it infuriated Kalik. The vision shifted again, or did not. There was a brief blackness, then all was as if nothing had occurred and no time had passed. Kalik, still attempting to digest what happened, also noticed a haziness around everything. Definition returned a second later, yet the memory of what had taken place remained with the Blue Dragon. This is wrong. Kalik could only guess that something had gone awry with the artifact. He had to assume that it was through Jaina's efforts to enter the Nexus. If not that, then degradation had spread through the relic by other means. Whichever the case, if it continued, it threatened to take Kalik's mind with it. The vision lost some definition again, but corrected. The deathly glow increased as Malagos neared, and then Kalik and his host beheld Galakron. Bigger. He's grown bigger yet. The Blue Dragon could not believe the size of the malevolent proto-dragon. Galakron had to be half again his previous size. He filled up much of the area below. Malagos's thoughts momentarily turned to distrust and Tyr. This was surely what their supposed comrade had kept from them. It made some sense. Tyr might have been concerned that his chosen champions would have been more reluctant to do battle if they knew that their adversary had become more dangerous than before. But while Malagos's focus did not go beyond Galakron's growth, the Blue Dragon studied the glow. There was more to it than merely increasing the behemoth's size. Galakron was going through another transformation, one that, if completed, Kalik feared would make the insidious creature impossible to destroy. Had it been his choice, Kalik would have had Malagos retreat until they could better identify just what sort of overall change was taking place. However, Malagos, no doubt acting on Tyr's plan despite misgivings, dived toward Galakron and looked ready to assault the gigantic proto-dragon's head. Galakron's breathing was low, rhythmic. He was deep, deep asleep. Perhaps more so because of the transformation. Every extra eye that Malagos's view took in was shut tight. The various limbs dangling from the body hung as if dead. Kalik could see why Tyr would recommend attacking while Galakron looked so defenseless, but he doubted that it would be that simple. Whether or not it would be simple, Malagos chose that second to strike. The frost battered the eyelid of the injured orb. Malagos exhaled with a fury Kalik had thus far not witnessed. The eyelid pressed in, and Kalik could not imagine that it did not hurt Galakron. The misshapen Leviathan roared as he woke. His wings spread, shattering rock formations on both sides. His tail whipped back and forth, leaving similar devastation in his wake. Little morsel! Galakron spoke as if time itself had slowed down for him, and yet he moved with incredible swiftness, his head darting skyward as he attempted to snap Malagos up, and almost succeeded. Bad little morsel. Taking to the air, Galakron pursued Kalik's host. The huge jaws once more sought to close in on the icy blue male. Neltharion landed on the snout, his hindpaws hitting with such force that, as mighty as he was, Galakron could not prevent his mouth from shutting hard. Alexstrasza and Nosdorno assaulted his two true eyes, forcing the behemoth to close them again. Ysera, where is Ysera? Malagos thought then. Only at that point did Kalik understand that the yellowish female should have been the next to add her strength. A shadow loomed before Galakron, a shadow that could hardly have been that of smaller Ysera, and a shadow that, as it shifted, revealed that it could not possibly be cast by any four-legged creature, much less a proto-dragon. A tremendous force battered Galakron's jaw, causing the monster's head to jerk to the side. That force, Kalik saw with no surprise, came from a huge hammer. Tyr, the true Tyr, stood revealed before the proto-dragons and Kalik and dived directly and eagerly into battle. Kalik could not judge Tyr's exact height, but the lunging warrior had to be nearly as tall as Galakron's shoulder. Yet that was perhaps the least of the revelations, for in entering battle, Tyr had tossed away his obscuring cloak and was revealed as he truly was. The crimson tunic that crossed over from the right side of his waist up to his opposing shoulder left much clear of a muscled torso that belied Tyr's previous use of magic. A spellcaster he might be, but the keeper was hardly one who shied away from physical threats. Tyr wore no armor except shin guards and seemed unconcerned at charging unprotected against his scaled foe. A band with diamond patterns wrapped around his right arm above the elbow, and behind him flowed a lesser cloak of the same coloring as his tunic, and connected at the neck by a high pointed collar. The cloak moved again all of its accord, seeming like an extra appendage as Tyr positioned himself to strike again. But as Tyr swung his hammer, Kalik briefly forgot the struggle as an object still attached to the keeper's thick belt dangled. The artifact's simple presence seemed to mock the unseen blue dragon. It glittered despite the lack of bright sunlight, and Kalik could swear that it was conscious of every critical moment. Then Tyr hit Galakron, this time battering the other side of the proto-dragon's huge jaws. Galakron stumbled back, crashing into a mountainside to his right, and sending a tremor through the vicinity. "Now!" Tyr shouted. Neltharion landed on the mountainside against which Galakron had crashed. The charcoal-gray male stomped hard against the peak, sending a shock wave through it several times stronger than even the Leviathan's collision. A tremendous rockslide rained on the monstrous proto-dragon. Even as the rocks tumbled down on Galakron, Tyr brought up his hammer. However, instead of battering his adversary, the gigantic warrior hit the ground right before Galakron. Assaulted by yet another tremor, the malformed behemoth sprawled. Galakron tried to use his enormous wings to push himself upright, but the new tremor caused him to slip back. Barely had Neltharion pulled away when Alexstrasza re-entered. Flames shot dangerously near Galakron's true eyes, causing him to shut them instinctively. Kalik expected the other eyes to make up for that, but then saw that the incessant rockslide had also forced most of them shut. Tyr had Malagos and his friends working a very coordinated attack against Galakron. Not for 1 second was the fiend allowed respite. However, even though victory appeared to be leaning towards the defenders, one thing continued to very much disturb the blue dragon. The glow had not faded in the least. It had actually magnified since Galakron had been attacked. Malagos joined in. Kalik barely had time to comprehend what was happening before his host exhaled at Galakron's exposed maw. The frost left Galakron gasping, but as Malagos pulled away, Kalik sensed something his host did not. A power radiating around the gargantuan proto-dragon was increasing. Galakron expanded. The abrupt escalation in size sent Malagos scurrying away even faster. Neltharion, just diving in again, quickly veered off. With a tremendous roar, Galakron righted himself. Tyr's hammer slammed into his jaw and bounced back without making the monster so much as flinch. Every eye on the disfigured proto-dragon now glittered furiously. The vast wings flapped once, funneled by the curve of the landscape, the gusts they created threw the smaller proto-dragons and also Tyr in every direction. With another beat, the wings lifted the incredibly huge beast high above the ground. As that happened, it became apparent that Galakrond had increased in dimension and had become more distorted. His head was longer and thinner, and his snout stretched half again the length of that of any normal proto-dragon. His sharp teeth were wickedly curved, so much so that they greatly protruded when he clamped his jaws shut. And not only did more growth seem to be spreading across Galakrond's hulking form, but his skin also had a crustier, drier finish to it, almost as if he had become an undead like so many of his victims. Yet Yet one only had to look at the fearsome hunger rating from every eye to see that Galakrond lived, and lived for one thing. He paid no mind to Tyr, instead seeking the nearest of the smaller proto-dragons. That proved to be Malygos. As he lunged for his prey, Galakrond exhaled. Try as he might, Malygos could not escape the noxious cloud. It draped over him, instantly zapping his strength and will. Kalik felt his host's mind grow disoriented, despite Malygos's attempts to fight the effect. The blue dragon struggled to do something, already well aware that his efforts would come to nothing. Galakrond loomed over Malygos. To his credit, the small proto-dragon forced his wings to flap, gaining him a few precious seconds, but to no escape. A gray streak collided with Galakrond at the monster's throat, Neltharion coming to the aid of his friend. The daring proto-dragon landed hind paws first against the hard hide. Although Neltharion clearly hit with at least as much effort in the past, the effect of his collision was markedly less than before. However, it was just enough to turn Galakrond's head from Malygos as the behemoth tried to snap up the icy blue male. No sooner had he struck than Neltharion raced away. It startled Kalik that the other proto-dragon did not try to reach Malygos, but then two pairs of hind paws seized the blue dragon's host and dragged him from the foul mist. As fresh air filled Malygos's lungs, the proto-dragon looked up. Alexstrasza and Nosdormu, inhaling with as much relief as Kalik's host, held on to Malygos until he had recovered enough. Only then did Kalik understand that they and Neltharion had all held their breath for as long as they could during their effort to save their comrade. In assaulting Galakrond, Neltharion had expended much of what little air he had retained, which is why he was unable to aid Malygos. Ysera, Alexstrasza abruptly called, turning from the two males. Nosdormu let out a low hiss of anger as he and Malygos followed with their gazes, the suddenly raising He and Malygos followed with their gazes the sudden racing Alexstrasza's intended path, which led back to none other than Galakrond. And there, a determined Ysera hovered directly before the Leviathan, who regarded her as Kalik did, as if she was truly mad. In Galakrond's case, though, a growing sense of amusement took command, and he grinned as she neared. "A tiny morsel you are," he rumbled. "Maybe I should let you grow a little fuller, a little stronger." "I am strong," Ysera roared. "You are not." Her incredible remark made Galakrond laugh. Ysera dived for the open mouth, only to have Alexstrasza seize her tail in her jaws and pull as hard as she could. Ysera came up short, just missing being swallowed when Galakrond instinctively shut his maw. He laughed again at Ysera and her futile attempts to pull free of her sister's tight hold. Tyr's hammer silenced the laugh with a blow so hard that even Galakrond, as he was now, could not stand against it. The enormous proto-dragon spun away from the powerful hit, several bits of scale flying from the damaged spot. The keeper, who had leapt in an incredible height to reach his target, seized Galakrond's shoulder and, with the sudden shift in mass, brought his hideous adversary back to the ground. Even then, Tyr did not let up. Releasing his grip, he followed the hammer strike with his fist, bringing it up under Galakron's jaw. And the massive proto-dragon's head snapped up from the force. Tyr threw himself into his foe's exposed chest, shoving the hammer towards Galakron's unprotected throat. Galakron blocked the blow with his paw. The move caught Tyr off guard, and with good reason, for with a normal proto-dragon, the forelimb would have been too short for Galakron to have been able to defend himself. Now, though, his distorted shape worked to his advantage. Indeed, Knaak saw similarities to true dragons. Yet, just like Tyr and Malygos, Knaak could not recall Galakron having such longer limbs only moments before. Through his host, Knaak observed the monster and saw Galakron's shape alter slightly. The tail stretched and the wings took on a sharper cut to their outline. Even in the midst of pitched battle, the forces within Galakron were continuing to transform him. The tail came around and circled Tyr's left leg. Tyr brought the hammer down, but the tail retreated. Galakron exhaled on the keeper, but Tyr appeared ready for such an attack even then. He drove his fist into Galakron's throat. Hacking, the proto-dragon stumbled back. Simultaneously, Malygos and his companions flew in to aid Tyr. Galakron took to the air again. Tyr seized one wing, hanging as the fiend rose swifter than the smaller proto-dragons. Once again he brought his hammer into play, landing a heavy blow against the side of Galakron's skull. The hammer bounced back with such force that Tyr could not maintain his grip. Galakron, utterly unfazed and glowing brighter than ever, twisted in the air. The wide wings sent Nozdormu and Neltharion fluttering back in order to avoid being hit. Tyr, trying to retrieve his weapon before it flew beyond recovery, almost lost his hold on Galakron. Already aware that Tyr could not reach the hammer in time, Malygos raced after it. As he did, another flying object caught Knaak's attention. The artifact, somehow tore free from Tyr's belt, spiraled through the air. Tyr, still clutching the wing, evidently also noticed his loss. With his hammer obviously beyond retrieval, the keeper sought not to lose the relic too. His hand closed on it, just as both artifact and appendage came within range of Galakron's teeth. Tyr's scream echoed through the Tyr's scream echoed through the land. His grip on the wing vanished. He dropped from Galakron. Forgetting the hammer, Malygos lunged for Tyr. He caught the bleeding keeper by the shoulder, grunting as he discovered just how heavy Tyr was. The keeper's descent slowed but did not stop. It was Ysera who helped him prevent Tyr from slipping free. Hissing from effort, the smaller female proved hardy enough to enable Malygos to glide all three of them to a ridge. Alexstrasza followed close behind. Both Knaak and his host expected Galakron to be right on their tails, but instead the misshapen monster hovered in the sky, glowing more ominously than ever. He also appeared to still be growing. There was no sign of Nozdormu or Neltharion. Malygos looked to Tyr, who had been the proto-dragon's guide in trying to destroy Galakron. Tyr's entire hand had been bitten off, and blood drenched not only the stump, but also much of the rest of his body. Galakron roared again, his thundering tone filled with disdain for the tiny creatures that sought to put an end to his glorious ascension. Malygos glanced from the badly wounded Tyr to the colossal beast, and his thoughts of dread and the imminent fate of himself and his world touched Knaak's mind. Knaak knew that Azeroth should survive, but watching Galakron fill the sky with his awful presence made the blue dragon doubt the very future of which he had already no longer felt a part. Moreover, with Tyr's life ebbing away and the artifact now lost to the behemoth's insatiable appetite, Knaak saw no future for himself. He and Malygos would perish with the rest of the proto-dragons. And as if to testify to that certainty of that dire fate, Galakrond continued to grow and change. All right. We're at the last part. Last 5 chapters. Now, I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking that this tear lost a hand. Galakrond ate it, but he was already turning into a regular dragon before that. So what did he chew on before that he was starting to change? Because as far as we know, the Titans uplifted those 5 dragons into the aspects and turned into the dragons that we know of as being dragons. But Galakrond, before he even ate Tyr's hand, was turning into one of those dragons. What did he eat before? Is that what Tyr wasn't telling them? What else did he mess up that he's not telling anybody? All right. Last 5 chapters. We'll see how far we get. Sweat dripped over Jaina's face as she continued to focus on her spell. The nexus pulsated, the outer wards now visible even to a non-spellcaster. Not that there were any nearby. The Archmage felt the resistance to her work pushed back, but she countered it as best she could. And then, all opposition to Jaina's efforts evaporated. The wards returned to their original states. The nexus ceased glowing. Without hesitation, Jaina transported herself inside. To her surprise, the chamber in which she materialized looked untouched by all her efforts outside. Pushing that fact aside, the Archmage used her powers to seek out any unseen threats there still lurking throughout the sanctum. Finding none, she sent herself to where she last recalled Kalik being. He was not in sight. Panic arose, but as she peered over her shoulder, Jaina found Kalik's form lying on the other side of the chamber. From what she could determine, he looked as if he had crawled there. Even as she thought that, Kalik's left arm moved. His fingers scratched at the floor, and to her further dismay, Jaina saw that those fingers ended in the claws of a dragon. In fact, as she neared him, the spellcaster saw other distorted features. Stepping next to Kalik, Jaina almost slipped. The floor around him was slippery with his sweat. In addition to his altered state, he also appeared more emaciated. With growing fury, she turned her attention to the relic. It sat slowly pulsating, hardly radiating any noticeable magical emanations, and to her practiced eyes seemed perfectly harmless. Her personal protective spells strengthened. Jaina surveyed the object. While on one hand the Archmage could appreciate the elements of its creation, on the other hand she despised it for what it was doing to her Kalik. With that last sentiment firmly entrenched in her heart and mind, Jaina formed the reverse symbol and sent it flying towards the artifact. But as the icon touched it, the relic shimmered. Its energy reached through the length Jaina had to maintain with the symbol and caught the Archmage square before she could dismiss the spell. Jaina's world turned upside down. That was followed by utter darkness and then a babble of voices with a particularly reptilian hint to them. And that was followed by a mad array of images, including creatures she recognized as proto-dragons. In the midst of all of those, Jaina realized that she was a proto-dragon herself, and one whom she knew, albeit in a far altered form. Alexstrasza? I'm part of Alexstrasza? It was a very young Alexstrasza, an Alexstrasza whom Jaina never had really known existed. Through Alexstrasza's eyes, she saw the other proto-dragons whom she vaguely recognized, but would not have specifically known if not for her host. She saw Ysera, a shockingly small Ysera, Nosdormu, Neltharion, and Malagos. Each of the scenes lasted barely a breath, and many appeared to Jaina to be out of sequence. Most made no sense, and more than a few filled her with dread. The Archmage saw horrific, rotting proto-dragons that were surely undead. She saw the wasted corpses of others. Most daunting to Jaina was the monstrous reality that was Galakrond, and she felt Alexstrasza's chilling dismay as if it were her own. It was all too much. Jaina almost passed out under the strain. At the last moment she imagined the reverse symbol and tried to impose it on every image that confronted her. With a gasp, the Archmage discovered herself stumbling back from the artifact. And not for her protective spells, Jaina would have fallen and likely cracked open her skull. As it was, she had to plant herself quickly against the nearest wall and stand there for more than a minute as she fought the residues of vertigo. The voices still echoing in her head, Jaina looked from the relic to Kalik. She had some notion of what he was going through, but suspected that her experience had been only a fraction of what the blue dragon was caught up in. The moment that Jaina felt able to, she returned to Kalik. With gentle hands, she turned his face to her. Up close, his condition was worse than she imagined. He reminded her of how it had been said to some of the more severe victims of the Emerald Nightmare had appeared, when thousands had fallen to the power of the Nightmare Lord and his master. They had lain helpless, unable to wake from their tormented sleep even as their minds began to waste away. Jaina shuddered. She had been one of those victims, one of the earliest, in fact. But until now, the extent of her condition had not truly registered with her. That in turn only magnified her current fear for Kalik. He mumbled. Jaina leaned closer. His eyes opened wide, eyes that were pure dragon, not those that when wearing this form. The Archmage pulled back in surprise. A frosty exhalation enshrouded her. Had she not protected herself, it was very likely she would have died. Even despite her spells, the Archmage could feel the intense cold. But this was not the breath weapon that she knew Kalik used. Rather, from the fragmented vision that she had experienced, Jaina realized that Kalik had acted as young Malagos had. Kalik settled down again. Jaina cautiously touched his cheek, then his throat. What he had currently experienced in the vision she did not know, but his blood raced. Casting a spell, the Archmage searched for the link between the artifact and Kalik, only to find no trace. She had been certain that she could locate some connection and take steps to sever it. That forced her focus back to the artifact. Moving more warily, Jaina inspected every visible side. She neither saw nor detected anything new. However, as she started to pay attention to the aura surrounding it, the Archmage noticed something about the pulsations. Jaina quickly turned to Kalik and felt his pulse. This time, though, the spellcaster simultaneously turned her gaze to the relic. The pulsations matched the throbbing in Kalik's throat. The artifact had become attuned to his life, or perhaps had attuned him to its spell work. In either case, Jaina Proudmoore had a plan. With it, she believed that she could finally free Kalik from the artifact's overwhelming influence. There remained but one flaw in her plan, a flaw that made Jaina hesitate to commit to it, even as Kalik began mumbling again. Yes, she could very well free him, but it was just as likely that her attempt would also end in his painful death. Kalik renewed clawing the floor. His claws tore valleys in the hard surface. Gritting her teeth, the Archmage saw that she had no choice. She immediately began casting, and praying. Malagos tore his gaze from the ever-swelling Galakrond and concentrated on Tyr. As Tyr laid there, the proto-dragon's ally had at some point shrunken down to nearly the size he had been when Malagos had first seen him. A desperate notion ran through Malagos's mind. a notion that seemed desperate even to Kalik. Yet the dragon appeared with his host that there was no other recourse. As he had done with his own wounded leg, Malagos exhaled on Tyr's ruined limb. The stump froze. The blood ceased flowing. Tyr let out a moan, but otherwise seemed to calm. Must take him away, Ysera declared as she joined him. Where? The shattered region in which the survivors hid appeared to be the most logical conclusion, but if Galakrond followed the scent of Tyr's blood, the Malagos might end up betraying the ragged refugees. He could not bring himself to do that, and for what he had seen of Tyr, he doubted the two-legged being would have wanted such a sacrifice on his behalf. Must take him away, the yellowish female repeated. Shrugging, she added, we'll find somewhere, just far from Galakrond. Kalik's host glanced up at their monstrous foe. At the moment, Galakrond appeared lost in his latest transformation, but whether that stupor would last a few more seconds or keep on for longer was impossible to say. The fact that Galakrond continued to hover as this happened made Malagos believe that they did not have much time at all. Without waiting for Ysera to help him, Malagos seized hold of Tyr by his shoulders and took to the sky. Instinct drove him toward the most desolate region he could think of beyond the place where they were already. He only hoped it would be desolate enough and that Galakrond's condition would give them the time they needed. Looking over his shoulder, Malagos saw a proto-dragon come up behind him. Instead of Ysera, it proved to be Alexstrasza. With her hind paws, she seized Tyr's legs. The weight better distributed, the icy blue male and Alexstrasza were able to pick up the pace. They matched wing beats as they flew, the coordination further adding to their speed. Daring to glance back again, Malagos became more relieved and apprehensive. Relieved because not only did Ysera follow, but also at a greater distance followed Neltharion and Nosdormu. Apprehensive because Galakrond had grown yet again and changed form somewhat. His body was now bulkier, and jagged spikes dotted the upper part of the torso, and although he continued to hover, he looked finally to be stirring. Alexstrasza, too, had been peering back at Galakrond. Fly faster, she suddenly suggested to Malagos. Lower. Galakrond will not see us so soon. The icy blue male nodded, and then the vision shifted. The cold, stark landscape startled Kalik, for at first he thought he was back in his own era. The high peaks, the desolate, flat plains below. He knew this place. They were in what would some day be the Dragon Light. Malagos and Alexstrasza still held on to Tyr, but now they descended. A choice had been made, but why it was this particular location was not clear to Malagos's thoughts. Kalik assumed that they had simply chosen somewhere they hoped they would not be readily discovered by Galakrond. With extreme care, the pair set Tyr on the chilly ground, then alighted next to him. Malagos peered around as if expecting something, but even Kalik's host did not seem to know just what he sought. Alexstrasza looked to Malagos, as did the rest once they landed. Here? Neltharion finally growled. No good hunting. Grazers far from here. Some good hiding in the mountains, but too open here. Here, the icy blue male replied with a certainty that did not match the knowledge Kalik could glean from his host's mind. Malagos simply knew that he had come to this place. Nosdormu looked satisfied with the vague answer, but then asked, What now? Malagos looked south, deeper into the flat, stark plains that made up much of Dragonblight. That way. He started off only to have Ysera block the path. With a puzzled expression, he gestured with her snout behind Malagos. What about Tyr? Kalik's host glanced back. Both he and the blue dragon had somehow forgotten the keeper's presence. While Malagos took this in stride, Kalik wondered at the proto-dragon's memory lapse. It was too sudden. Fluttering off the ground, Malagos took gentle hold of Tyr again. As far as Kalik could tell, Tyr looked no worse than before, but whether that was good or bad was impossible for the blue dragon to say. He knew only that the proto-dragons had to do more for Tyr very soon. But what? Kalik wondered. Had it been he to decide, he would have figured out a magic spell to preserve Tyr until some method of healing could be found. But the proto-dragons did not have any ability to do even that. Magic. Now Kalik felt as if he had forgotten something else that was vital, something having to do with his own existence. Something to do with the Nexus? Malagos chose at that moment to descend again. Focusing on the landscape below, Kalik at first did not see anything other than more icy ground. Then a single darker spot caught his attention. As Malagos drew near, Kalik realized that the dark spot was a frozen lake. The blue dragon could not remember such a spot in his time, but he knew that his memory was faultier than he had originally thought. Landing on the edge of the lake, Malagos set Tyr down, this time placing the keeper on his back. That allowed Kalik to study the prone form. Tyr's breathing looked shallow but regular, and the stump was still protected by the frost Malagos had previously sprayed over it. The proto-dragon carefully exhaled on the savage wound again, reinforcing his earlier efforts. Yet doubts about Tyr's survival once more began to creep into the mind of Kalik's host, doubts the blue dragon shared. Despite that, Malagos abruptly abandoned Tyr for the frozen lake. Neltharion and the others joined him, the four looking oddly breathless as they landed. So fast, Neltharion finally managed after taking a couple of big gulps of air. Malagos flew so fast. Should have waited for us, Alexstrasza reprimanded him. Saw a not living far away. She indicated the west. Maybe others near. If they see us, Galakrond sees us. Malagos saw nothing in that direction, and to Kalik he seemed not inclined to be concerned despite Alexstrasza's sensible words. Again, it was not Malagos as Kalik had come to know him. The icy blue male continued to the frozen lake. As he peered down into it, he and Kalik saw some slight movement in the water. That his host was hungry, Kalik could understand, but Malagos bordered on the obsessive. In fact, Kalik's host was persisting in pushing the other four to join him. Come, must eat. Strength needed. Neltharion obeyed without question, his appetite always the greatest of the five. Nosdorma looked dubious, then nodded. Ysera quietly followed the three. Only Alexstrasza did not move. What of Tyr? He sleeps, the icy blue male responded. Let him. The answer was not said with coldness, but with practicality. Alexstrasza considered the suggestion, then finally nodded and joined the four. Kalik would have preferred that someone watched here, but now 5 of the proto-dragons were eager to feed. The ice supported not only Malagos's weight, but also that of the rest of the group. Nosdorma scratched at the ice, but, despite his sharp claws, made little headway. Neltharion looked ready to stomp on the frozen surface, which would have no doubt shattered all the ice, including where the 5 stood, but Alexstrasza quickly hissed and shook her head. With the others watching, she chose the spot a little farther into the lake, then carefully exhaled. The concentrated flame melted a hole into the thick ice until water bubbled up to the top. She expanded the hole until it was a satisfactory width. Although Alexstrasza had created the hole, she let Neltharion feed first. He eagerly leaned over it, then suddenly thrust his head down. The charcoal gray male withdrew a thick fish in his mouth. Grunting with satisfaction, he stepped back. Alexstrasza went next, her task taking slightly longer before she caught sight of her prey. Malagos finally took his turn. He had barely leaned over when another fat fish swam into range. Catching it was as simple a task for Kalik's host as it had been for others. As the icy blue male backed away, Ysera moved toward the hole. Malagos turned to the shore, his catch still wriggling in his jaws. Once off the ice, the proto-dragon surveyed the chilly landscape. There was no sign of either Galakrond or any of the undead. Malagos focused his attention on the fish, tearing into it with such gusto that Kalik wished his host would shut his eyes so that the blue dragon would not have to watch. Trying to concentrate on anything else, Kalik shifted his thoughts to Tyr. That the proto-dragons had left the keeper in order to eat was not entirely a surprise, but they needed to find other aid for Tyr as soon as possible. Kalik wondered where the other keepers were. Did they not sense Tyr's urgent situation? The blue dragon had thought that they would have some kind of link with one another, something that would... Ragged hiss arose from Malagos's right. Both Kalik and his host recognized the foul sound. How the two emaciated proto-dragons had snuck up on the party, neither Malagos nor Kalik knew. There was no time to consider that either, for one of the undead lunged for Malagos, its yellow teeth dripping with a sickening green fluid that surely boded ill if it even touched the living proto-dragon. Spinning to the side, Malagos brought his tail around. Like a whip, it caught the undead's hind leg. Malagos pulled just as what passed for the brain of the monster registered the attack. The cadaverous proto-dragon fell onto its side. However, Malagos's tail briefly became entangled with the fiend, leaving Kalik's host vulnerable to the second undead. But a hard column of sand struck the creature, sending it flying. As it landed, a plume of flame draped over it, the dry flesh igniting. Despite that, the burned undead rose. So too did the first. Freeing his tail, Malagos swung in the opposite direction. This time he knocked the first corpse toward the lake. While Kalik's host had not done so with any other intention than to bowl his foe over, the sprawling undead landed just in front of Ysera. Adapting quickly, the smaller female used her tail to help the monster continue its slide, but in one particular direction. The struggling corpse plunged into a hole in the ice. It clawed the edges, seeking some hold. With the lightest tap of his hind paw, Neltharion made the ice shake. It was enough to put an end to what little hold the undead had. The shriveled proto-dragon vanished below. Through Malagos, Kalik caught a glimpse of the thing floating away from the gap before sinking into the frozen depths. The other undead, entirely oblivious to the fire raging over its body, trudged toward Alexstrasza. Before she could exhale, Nosdorma released another column of sand. The column hit squarely. Combined with the damage already inflicted by the flames, the sand shattered the creature, sending sizzling fragments all over the area. Some of those continued to move for several moments after landing, then gradually stilled. Moving out onto the ice, Malagos stared into the frozen lake. After a few seconds, he spotted the first undead. The creature once again moved towards the surface, still searching for a path out. Heading to the hole, Kalik's host exhaled on the opening. It took little effort to freeze the already sluggish liquid. The proto-dragon stepped back. Even if the undead did reach the hole, it would find no exit now. Malagos returned to the others. Neltharion was in the process of prodding various bits of burned cadaver in order to assure himself that nothing remained animated. Nosdorma had once more started in on his fish, and Alexstrasza was staring at the distant mountains, her expression thoughtful. Only Ysera paid attention to Malagos as he returned. Kalik's host eyed the remnants of the one creature. Something bothered him, but the proto-dragon did not know what. That stirred a similar concern in Kalik, who felt that he had also missed something earlier. The icy blue male's head snapped up. He whirled to where he had left Tyr. The body was gone. Only a few faint specks of blood decorated the impression Tyr's form had made. Leaping past the others, Malagos searched in every direction. Yet no matter where he looked, there was no trace, not even the least of trails. "Gone," Ysera murmured to him. "Gone? Where? How?" She shrugged. The others had finally taken notice of the situation. They joined in a quick search, Neltharion even darting over the frozen lake, but all to no avail. "Lost. Tyr lost," Malagos snarled, angrier with himself than with anyone else. He considered Tyr his to protect. But while the proto-dragons continued what they obviously considered a fruitless hunt for the missing tear, Kalik, his only recourse to think, finally realized what had bothered him. When Malagos had turned toward the shore, fish in his mouth, his gaze had passed where Tyr had been set down. The only problem, Kalik now realized, was that Tyr had already vanished by then. Something had taken the keeper, something that Kalik could not help but think had done so with a purpose other than to eat. But that's the thing, is like the Titan Keepers tend to like disappear and reappear, so I'm like, maybe he just kind of like off somewhere. I mean, that would be my first guess. But they don't know that. What now? Natharian asked. What now? Malagos gave it a strong consideration, his mind darting over a number of choices with a clarity that impressed Kalik. However, it was Alexstrasza who answered first, firmly stating what Malagos had also included. We must fight. There were no protests, no refusals. Both Malagos and Kalik were pleased by how quickly the rest agreed with their suggestion, and Kalik began to remember the leadership role that Alexstrasza had assumed as one of the 5 great aspects. His host also appeared relieved that some of the responsibility for their chances had been taken up by another. Even Ysera did not argue with the decision, although judging from her expression, she appeared to have doubts about something. Kalik guessed it had to do with her own strength. While she was very determined, she showed signs of not having recovered nearly as much as her companions, despite the meal. His host vaguely noticed the same, but said nothing. Meanwhile, the others awaited Malagos's word on their course. His thoughts were still of import to them. He, after all, having been the one first picked for contact by Tyr. Malagos had been more than happy to turn to Tyr when the odd being had appeared. Tyr had looked so clever, so confident, and despite appearing smaller, he radiated a power far exceeding any individual proto-dragons. Tyr was nowhere to be found, though, and there was no sign of what had taken him or in which direction they had gone. To a creature such as a proto-dragon, the most logical conclusion was that a beast had taken the body, and even now was feasting on Tyr. And that left facing Galakrond to the 5, with Malagos obviously seen by the others as one of the party's more clever planners. Kalik understood all that passed through the icy blue male's mind, but he had additional considerations. More than ever, he was certain that something with a more intelligent purpose had stolen Tyr away. Yet that availed Malagos and the rest of the proto-dragons nothing. Neltharion let out a warning hiss. The 5 immediately crouched low. Near the mountains, 3 figures slowly flew northeast. There was something in their movements that did not indicate the fluidity with which proto-dragons soared through the sky. Although they were fast, these flew with halting, almost haphazard motions. Not living, Nosdormu muttered. The 3 forms vanished among the peaks. Malagos hissed. He had not noticed something that even Kalik had not seen at first. Fly too smart, not like the others. Search too good. Not living, do not think. They eat. Only eat. Neltharion looked puzzled, but the other 3 understood what Malagos meant. So did Kalik. The animated corpses had acted with intelligence, something they entirely lacked. Galakrond is their master, Alexstrasza blurted. They hunt what he hunts. Malagos finished the thought. And he hunts us. You said before. They're not living. They see us. Galakrond sees us. It was probably not quite so clear-cut as that, but Kalik too had no doubt that if the undead located them, Galakrond would find out. The Behemoth evidently did have control over his emaciated victims. Indeed, it was surprising that, with the 2 of them having just battled the defenders, Galakrond had not already appeared. Studying the land again, Malagos focused on the mountains. We go there." Their gazes followed in the direction of which he pointed his snout. The undead had only passed beyond that region a minute ago. "They searched there," Alistraza reminded Malagos. He shook his head. "No, they searched there before." There was logic to Malagos's thinking, but not enough that Knaak would have readily agreed to such a course. However, Malagos's comrades were most amenable, nodding and following as the icy blue male took off. Knaak was pleased to see that Malagos at least kept low to the ground, the choice in altitude more likely to keep the proto-dragons from being easily seen. They reached the mountains quickly, but not quickly enough for Malagos or Knaak. Knaak's host slipped in among the sharp peaks, seeking cover wherever possible and watching for undead that might have done the same at Galakron's direction. "Turn here." Malagos did so instinctively before both he and Knaak wondered just who or what had told him to. It had not been a voice that his ears could hear, but his mind could. Confused, the proto-dragon pulled up short. Neltharion almost collided with him. The five hovered as Malagos all but spun in search of the speaker. But instead of finding that, he found Galakron. His shadow covered the narrow pass through which they flew. The smaller proto-dragons instantly separated, heading to whatever overhang or other cover they could locate. It was not that any sought to abandon the others. They knew that their only chance was for them to scatter. There was not enough protection in any one direction for all five. The shadows spread everywhere, yet it was nothing compared with the first glimpse of Galakron's immense body hovering over the area. The huge proto-dragon kept passing above without end, so great had he grown. Malagos waited for Galakron to completely pass, only to see the misshapen Leviathan pause. A huge hind paw, large enough to grab at least 3 of them whole, came crashing down on a peak. The landslide commenced, tons of rocks spilling down where Malagos knew that Alistraza and Nozdormu had taken different hiding places. The deadly downpour continued. It had not been done out of intention. Galakron was just that heavy. Another landslide rumbled in the distance, where no doubt his other hind paw had settled. With somewhat ponderous movements, Galakron shifted position. That resulted in additional collapses, but nothing that threatened as much as the previous. A smaller forepaw, smaller only in comparison with the hind paws, came into view. Galakron was backing up, possibly to search in the very region where they hid. Worse, even without yet bringing his head back, Galakron had already inspected the vicinity, the extra eyes eagerly darting here and there. Malagos pressed harder against the rocks, certain more than once that he had been spotted. Yet Galakron did not leap back and thrust his head down in order to devour him. Instead, the savage behemoth shifted around so that his forepaw became more evident, and then he moved forward again. The new landslides that action brought about were a small threat compared with not only the first, but also what would have happened if Galakron had seen any of them. As the gargantuan proto-dragon's tail finally vanished over one peak, Malagos exhaled in the relief that both he and Knaak felt. The mountains around them shook. Scarcely a breath later, Galakron's head thrust over the area. He did not look Malagos's way, but stared down in the vicinity where Malagos remembered Ysera heading. The icy blue male could not see her, but he was certain that the very shadows at which Galakron stared most attentively were the ones hiding Alistraza's sister. The misshapen behemoth hissed. A hint of the foul mist he had earlier exhaled drifted from the massive jaws. Fortunately, it proved to be only an after effect of his breathing and not a focused assault. Still, Galakron continued to try to see what lay in the shadows below. He did not glow anymore, a fact that worked to the smaller proto-dragon's favor, as the glow would have been strong enough to illuminate most, if not all, of the shadowed region. Suddenly, Galakron began coughing. Within seconds, the coughing grew so intense that Malagos wondered if perhaps they might be saved by Galakron simply succumbing to whatever afflicted him. That was not meant to be, though, for after a few thunderous moments, the coughing subsided. But during that fit, Kalik observed minute changes in Galakron. Some of the extra appendages and eyes shrank, and a few even shriveled to little more than mottled flesh. Even when the fit ended, those did not revert to how they had been before. Kalik feared that his host would miss what he now noticed, but soon discovered that he had underestimated Malagos. Suppressing a hiss, Malagos stored the knowledge away as he waited for Galakron to depart. Okay, theory time. So, if originally Galakron made a deal with, like, N'Zoth, which would account for the eyes on him, and then, well, he did eat a part of a Titan, so he has Titan magic in there. The two forces are fighting in Galakron right this second, and that's why, like, the Titan ability, the that Titan hand that he ate, is kind of like fighting off the um changes that N'Zoth's bargain had done, or Void Lord bargain had done. So he's got Titan poisoning, and it's making him change shape all over the place. So he's gonna be this weird misshapen dragon floating around, hacking like an old man, and then kind of changing and warping and who knows what. Wow, this is great. I wouldn't even get this. I wouldn't even understand this if I hadn't, like, gotten through um stuff later on. Like, once we got to know more about the Void Lords and, like, the Zoth and anything about the Titans and what they did with the dragons and all that, I would never piece this together, honestly. This just seems so weird. But now that I know that stuff, even this is making more sense. And this was published around when Kata actually came out, right? Because we had the ending where the aspects gave up their powers in the very beginning of this book. They're still hurting from losing their abilities, shall we say. They just feel like, average mortals now, and they're hurting from it. So now they feel like, what the Night Elves are feeling when they lost their abilities for eternal youth and such. So that's interesting. Okay, let's see. Okay. After another brief study of the area below, Galakron finally moved on. However, Malagos did not move for several minutes afterward, nor could he see any of the others shifting position. After the sudden return, none of the five wanted to take the chance that Galakron might come back. Finally risking himself, Malagos started from his hiding place to where he had seen Alexstrasza disappear. The remnants of the landslide at her location at first concerned him greatly. However, as he neared, she thrust her snout out of a deeper shadow and sniffed the air before fully coming into sight. The others? She asked worriedly, her greatest concern without a doubt for her sister. Malagos could only shrug. They headed to where Nostormo had last been seen and where even more rocks buried much of the area. Unlike Alexstrasza, though, Nostormo sat perched atop the rubble, waiting expectantly for his comrades. Hurt? He asked both. When they shook their heads, he stretched his wings. The left one moved noticeably more slowly than the right. Pain. But only pain. Despite Nostormo sounding unperturbed, Kalik could tell that Malagos and Alexstrasza were concerned. A minor injury could still slow Nostormo at a critical time. For all of her worry over Nosdormu, Alexstrasza changed the subject to one dearer to her. Is Sarah? Here. The yellowish female alighted just behind her sister. Safe. To Kalik, Ysera sounded slightly annoyed, as if she did not want her sibling to be so fearful for her, despite the dangerous predicament through which they had come. They waited a moment before Malagos cautiously asked what was probably all on their minds. Neltharion? None of the others offered news. Malagos hissed. Taking flight, he soared toward the charcoal gray's male's last known location, only to pull back abruptly at what he found. The spot Neltharion had chosen had been hit by far more rubble than any of the other locations. Eyeing it, Malagos could not imagine any hope of survival. Kalik shared his doubt, despite managing to recall that Neltharion should survive, to eventually become Deathwing. Then a faint sound farther on attracted Malagos. Simultaneously, Alexstrasza and the others alighted next to Kalik's host. They too heard the sound. Scrabbling over the rocks, Malagos discovered that the overhang the charcoal gray male had rushed to extended farther than first assumed. While that offered hope, the fact that part of the overhang had also collapsed under the weight of the avalanches did not. Neltharion might still be alive, but what condition was he in? The sound arose again, this time nearly under Malagos's paws. He leapt back, concerned that his weight might be crushing his companion. Malagos planted his head against the rubble. He heard movement, followed by the intake of breath. Here! With his hind paws, he began excavating the pile. The others took up positions nearby, Alexstrasza helping to shovel away the rocks that Malagos pushed back. Nosdormu moved to help Malagos with his task, only to have Ysera shove her way in front of him. She began digging with earnest. Nosdormu finally joined Alexstrasza in clearing away what had been dug up, so that Malagos and Ysera could shovel more from where Neltharion had been buried. It grew silent below them. That made Malagos dig harder, but to his surprise, Ysera dug harder yet. She moved at a manic pace, and although Kalik's host did not think about it, Kalik understood that she had to be thinking of those Telenixa had buried alive. Ysera did not want Neltharion suffering such a fate, even though a part of Kalik wished that the proto-dragons would leave Neltharion to perish. A future without Deathwing was something generations of creatures on Azeroth would have been very grateful for. But Malagos and the others worked diligently to rescue one who was their friend. Ysera let out a hiss and used her weaker forepaws to pull a rock away. That revealed part of a wing. It was immediately evident that Neltharion's wings had been pinned around him, which explained his inability to assist in his own rescue. One thing that had saved him, though, was that the part of the overhang where his head lay had remained intact. Had it collapsed, Neltharion's skull would have been crushed like an egg. The future Deathwing hacked as he tried to breathe in fresh air, the manner of his near death and irony not lost on Kalik, who knew that Neltharion would somehow become the aspect of Earth. Still pinned as he had to wait as Malagos and Ysera uncovered the entire wing before he was able to move. Once the wing was free, Neltharion started stretching it, which also enabled him to use one of his forepaws. While weak compared with his hind paws, it was still capable of shoving away more of the rocks, keeping him trapped. As they freed Neltharion, his injuries became more apparent. While, like Nosdormu, he had survived intact, severe bruises covered his body, and blood spattered him in several places. There were some rips in his wings, but a glance by Malagos revealed none that looked as if it would impair the charcoal gray male's flying. Neltharion stumbled to his paws. He twisted his neck around and looked up. Galakron? Gone, Malagos replied. For now. So powerful, Ysera muttered as she stepped close. So powerful. What can we do? The sister did not hesitate. Fight, or die. Neltharion, his breath recovered, snorted. Probably die. But immediately he added, Better to die fighting, though. Better to die fighting, yes, Malagos agreed, eyeing Alexstrasza most of all. Better to live after, though. Better, yes, she echoed. But just how they would do that was a tremendous question. First and foremost, they had to find another place to hide while they considered how to combat what appeared invincible. Follow the ridge. While the thought had eased into Malagos's mind with such subtlety that the proto-dragon did not realize it was not his own, Kalik knew that it had come from elsewhere. He could not identify its source. It did not sound like Tyr, who surely would have identified himself. And if it was another keeper, why would the speaker not say so? Curiously, it reminded Kalik of something, but just what escaped him. And in truth, he had to admit, it mattered not. Kalik still had no part of this endless vision except as an imprisoned observer. While he railed at that, it was the only existence he knew, or at least remembered at the moment. But I have another life, Kalik suddenly insisted to himself. The Nexus, and there was a name the Blue Dragon wanted, no, needed to recall. Ignore my iCloud thing, it's being stupid. Boop. There was a name the Blue Dragon wanted, no needed to recall. Not his own. He had remembered it only a short time ago. A female name. One Kalik should have known well, and one that more often had been part of his thoughts before these visions had overtaken him. That realization at last stirred some of those forgotten memories. Jayla? Jaina? Jaina! His most immediate recollections returned full blown. Jaina was probably trying to enter the Nexus, and if she was in grave danger. I have to save her, I have to. The vision abruptly faded. The darkness that Kalik had so often cried out against, he now welcomed wholeheartedly, if only it would bring him back to the Nexus. Something hard lay against him, or rather he lay against the hard surface. Despite being unable to see it, Kalik had to assume that it was the floor of the chamber, and that further encouraged him. He tried to summon enough strength to move some part of his body. He knew that voice, but he wondered again who it was. Jaina. It was Jaina. He had already forgotten. How can this be? How can I keep forgetting? The artifact. Kalik now discovered that he had forgotten the accursed relic. Kalik? Jaina's voice came clearer but fainter. She repeated his name, but this time he could barely hear her. In desperation, Kalik tried to reach out. To his surprise, he felt his claws, scrape the floor. The act sent shivers through his nerves, but he welcomed that discomfort for the slight sense of reality it gave him. He focused on that and on Jaina, trying to create a more powerful anchor by combining both. Kalik, listen to me. Her voice came stronger again. Simultaneously, the Blue Dragon managed to scrape the floor a second time. Sensation began to return to his body. He felt the blood flowing through his limbs and torso. What sounded like breathing, whether his own or hers, he could not say, echoed in his ears. Jaina! Jaina! Kalik cursed his mouth, which still did not function. He had to let her know that he could hear her. A distant roar drowned out Jaina's voice just as she repeated his name. The roar shook Kalik, not only because of its suddenness, but also because he knew it was not a dragon's, but as a proto-dragon's. Jaina! Kalik hesitated. Did he have the name right? And whose name was it anyway? A female, certainly, but the only females he was familiar with were Alexstrasza and her sister Ysera. Had he tried to call one of them? The darkness faded, and he and Malagos, as it had always been, flew together. But this time Kalik knew that things had changed. He could not say how, though. He still existed as some hidden part of Malagos, ever there observing. Kalik did not know how that had begun. He knew that he was and would always be linked to his proto-dragon host. And forgotten completely, at least now and perhaps always, was a future where a frightened female voice continued to call his name in vain. Jaina collapsed. Her plan had failed. She had made an ambitious attempt to bind herself to the link between the artifact and Calyx so she could, by matching the pulsations, reach out better to the unconscious dragon. In this matter, the Archmage had intended to draw him to her, and thus back to reality. But the artifact had proved to have the greater hold on him. For a few moments, Jaina had almost succeeded. However, the bond she had forged had been cut without warning. The relic had corrected for her intrusion, just as it had for a time corrected her attempts to invade the Nexus in the first place. And yet, Jaina pushed herself up from the floor, also using that moment to study Kalik. His breathing perfectly coincided with the artifact's pulsations. His body had contorted more, becoming less humanoid but not quite that of a dragon. There were traits growing on him, especially his torso, that did not remind her of any of those she had seen amongst the various dragonflights. Yet they were still vaguely familiar. She had seen them before. Some other creature. What was it? Jaina Proudmoore had studied virtually every major beast during her training. Members of the Kirin Tor had to know the flora and fauna of Azeroth for a variety of reasons, many of them dealing with survival. This one she had definitely seen. A proto-dragon? It did not seem possible. While she was aware that Kayla could assume more than one form, Jaina had no idea why he would take on that of something akin to a dragon, but not so nearly as powerful. Still, when she took a closer look, more proto-dragon traits became apparent. Worse, one of Kalix's arms was clearly shorter than it should have been, another change that added to his similarity to the beasts. Kalix suddenly let out a loud roar, not quite like that of a dragon. As he did, he altered further. His feet became more ponderous, as the hind limbs of proto-dragons were when compared with their forelimbs. And at the same time, the artifact's pulsations grew more rapid. The relic's aura intensified, and it enveloped Kalik too. Jaina reached for him, only to nearly singe her fingertips. There had been no trace of heat from the aura before, but now it burned like fire. Kalik's shifting continued unchecked. His body darkened. The Archmage shielded herself and tried a second time to get to Kalik, only to retreat from even stronger heat. Grasping, Jaina also saw that Kalik's breathing quickened more, ever matching the increase in the artifact's pulsations. This can't go on long. It can't. Jaina understood all too well that there would come a point where his body could not withstand this mad metamorphosis. A creature of magic he might be, but he still had mortal limitations. Kalik, although he was a dragon, would literally burn out, and thus far Jaina had no idea how to save him. So, I know some of these artifacts, if I'm recalling this correctly, what this thing is, and some of them either work as repair droids or are memory cores. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking it's either trying to do, is it broken in a way that it's trying to repair him into being what a dragon actually should be and reverting him back from being an elevator dragon? Or is this something that is reverting him into Malygos himself? I mean, because when we're playing Dragonflight, we find out that the discs that we had found before are a bunch of backup drives. The Emerald Dream is a backup drive. So is this a backup drive that's changing him back into Malygos at this point? You know, trying to overwrite him and make him Malagos the way he was, where it remembers it. It's my theory right now. All right. Malagos and Kalek followed the ridge just as the voice in the proto-dragon's head had suggested, but if they expected something spectacular or startling at the end, they were both disappointed. Instead, the mountains opened up into a bowl-shaped valley that, for some reason, bothered Kalek. Malagos simply saw it as another destination, one that Galakrond perhaps would not search or already had searched and abandoned. Oh boy, I think okay. If I don't know where they went, but it could be Sholazar Basin. If they're still in Northrend. A stream flowed through the area. The 5 proto-dragons landed to drink and think. Never in their lives had they had to think so much. Glancing at the others, Malagos wondered if they felt as worn out as he did. He blinked. Far beyond the 5, a rounded rock drifted where the water widened. Even proto-dragons knew that rocks do not drift. So Malagos fluttered up in the air and flew to the object. Kalek's host veered back to the moment he recognized what it was that lay half submerged. As Malagos had suspected, it was another proto-dragon's body. However, as he finally dared to alight next to it in the stream, he noticed something peculiar. The splash reminded... poof! A splash behind him announced Neltharion's more enthusiastic arrival. Striding up to Malagos, the charcoal-gray male scrutinized the find. Dead. Galakrond. We should destroy it before it rises. Malagos shook his head. Already did. This was not living. That is again dead. The other proto-dragon let out a snort of disbelief. He prodded the corpse, which, having already been rotted before its second death, now easily began breaking apart in the water. How can not living be not living again unless we destroy it? Kalek, ever paying attention, also wondered. His first inclination was that either another proto-dragon had managed to do as Neltharion suggested, or the undead had, for some reason, simply collapsed. Yet Kalek had seen no evidence of the second occurring, and his host was also disinclined to that answer, which only left the question of who had indeed destroyed this fiend. Another keeper? Malagos leaned closer. His sharp sense of smell detected another scent, one that at first he assumed had to be there for a very logical reason. Then as he eyed the decaying remains, something else about their condition registered. Before they had looked dry, now they were barely holding together. When Malagos did a little prodding of his own, the part not yet touched by the flowing water simply crumbled to ash. As that happened, the scent, or stench, Kalek's host had smelled increased tenfold. The source escaped Neltharion's mouth before the other proto-dragon even knew why he spoke the name. Galakrond. No Galakrond, Malagos interjected. In a more subdued voice he added, Not anymore. What do you mean? Even Kalek was not sure of Malagos' thoughts at that moment, for what little he could read from them did not make sense. Yet Malagos quickly verified those questionable thoughts. Galakrond was here. Galakrond devoured this not living. Neltharion looked at him as if he were mad. The other 3, just joining to see what fascinated the pair so much, had heard Malagos' declaration. Galakrond ate this not living? Nosdormu asked in utter puzzlement. Already ate it alive. Why eat it dead? What's left to eat, then? Asked Alexstrasza, sniffing at the corpse and wrinkling her nose. Galakrond, yes. Not long ago. The female's eyes narrowed and thought, Malagos is right. But this was dead, Neltharion insisted. Long dead. No meat, no life. Indeed, there was only the growing odor of rot. However, Malagos smelled a wrongness in that rot, as if something else tied to it also escaped at the same time. This lived, this died, he began, seeking to organize his words enough to make sure that everyone, himself included, understood the full extent. Became not living, moves but is dead, dead but moves. Kalik was naturally the first one to grasp what Malagos was leading up to. Even as a former aspect of magic, Kalik doubted that he would have come to what was the only possible conclusion before his young host had. Of the other four proto-dragons, it was Ysera who comprehended quickest. Not living move. Something moves them. No blood, no life, but something. Not life, Neltharion muttered. They have not life? The proto-dragons had not lived long in a world full of undead, as Kalik abruptly recalled he had, but they had come to grasp an important point. Still, the animated corpses of Galakron's victims were not exactly like most of the beings the blue dragon gradually remembered having confronted. What drove these apparently merely to be, as Malagos hinted, a force that was perhaps a byproduct of Galakron's absorption of the living creature's life essence. It was almost a parody of that essence, which made calling it not life very appropriate. But to go from that step to Galakron now absorbing this essence was disturbing. Why? Kalik asked himself, aware that he echoed Malagos in this regard. Why? Again, it was Kalik's host who discovered the possible reason. Malagos raised his head and looked off in the distance. Only Kalik knew that he listened for something in particular. No cries, Malagos rasped. No calls. All fear Galakron, Alexstrasza pointed out. All flee or hide, or die. Galakron still grows, still changes. Proto-dragons grow when they eat enough. The icy blue male used his wings to indicate the mountains. Nothing else for Galakron. Nothing big enough. Nothing simple. Except not living. Even though all five understood now, Kalik saw through Malagos that they nevertheless did not want to accept such facts. Galakron devouring what animated the undead was to them like the behemoth moving far beyond cannibalism. However, what bothered Kalik most was what this new and horrific feeding meant for Galakron's continuing metamorphosis. If absorbing the essence of his victims had turned him into such a misshapen monster, it followed that this would only twist him more. The five proto-dragons took no heart in the possibility that the number of undead might eventually be eradicated by Galakron's hunger. They knew that the foremost focus of Galakron's existence remained seeking out living prey, especially them. To Malagos, that gave him no choice. Still, once again, he tried to keep the rest from what appeared a doomed quest. Malagos looked to the other four. Must face Galakron. Now. Alone. No. Alexstrasza pushed herself in the middle of the group. We are family. We fight together. Always. She did not mean family in the sense that they were simply loyal friends, but rather as if the five of them were of a like color and appearance, born from the same kind of eggs. There was no deeper connection. Yes, Neltharion agreed, with some indignation at Malagos's initial suggestion. We fight as family. We fight together. But we are not family, Ysera countered. We fight differently, not same. She did not say it in denial of her sister's words, but with the tone that those differences were still important. Malagos nodded, having considered that, and also seeing it as their greatest strength. Perhaps their only hope, too. We fight differently, he says. We fight together. More. We use differences. Tyr showed some, but Tyr not proto-dragon. Not plan like proto-dragons. We must plan like proto-dragons. Made the only sense to Malagos, although Kalik was not quite so certain. Tyr, for all his might, for all of his obvious wisdom, had led the five as if they fought like him. He had used their individual abilities, yes, but in terms of complementing his own. He had been fighting a proto-dragon, a huge proto-dragon, as if facing something like himself. But Tyr had been correct in that their individual abilities could work in concert better than they had been all one true family. 5 Malagoses would not have had a better chance. 5 Neltharions would not have. And Malagos also had to admit that not every combination of 5 different proto-dragons could have worked together as well as when Tyr had led them. He could only imagine what a group that included someone like Koros would have done against Galakrond. We have not won, Malagos curtly reminded himself. More likely, we will lose everything. But even more than for himself, Malagos remained concerned for his 4 companions. He had to make certain that he guided them as best as possible, and that meant using their different skills to their utmost. I am only a proto-dragon. The thought jolted through Malagos with such force that Kalik also felt the flash of fear. Still, all Malagos had to do was look at Neltharion and the rest, who in turn waited for his word, to know that there was no retreating from his dominant role. But there was another who seemed willing to help take much of the burden from him. He looked to Alexstrasza. She already appeared to understand his concern. With a brief solemn glance at Malagos, Alexstrasza immediately focused on Neltharion. How do your kind fight? Tell us. Show us. Neltharion bared his teeth in a reptilian grin. He spread his wings and began to display the fighting skills of his family. The vision shifted, but while Kalik would have liked to know more about the abilities of the other 4, he was not surprised about the change. In fact, for the first time, the blue dragon felt comfortable with the shift. He did not see that this might not be a good sign for him. The scene before him could not be taking place all that long after the previous one. The 5 remained in the mountains, but now they perched atop part of a crooked peak, watching and waiting. But the sky remained conspicuously. I think I'm saying that right. But the sky remained conspicuously devoid of a creature so vast he could hardly be hiding. There were also no signs of the undead, which disturbed the group's leader. Where is Galakrond? Malagos crawled. Where? He stretched his wings restlessly before finally understanding what they had to do. Must bring him to us. Must let him know about us. He let out a roar. As he expected, it echoed throughout the mountains. Yet to his ears it did not sound nearly loud enough. Before Malagos could suggest it, Alexstrasza raised her head and repeated his call. The other 3 imitated her, all 5 within seconds shouting as one. The echoes of their combined cries resounded, even building as they rushed away from their source. As loud as they were, it would still have been impossible for most normal proto-dragons to hear them unless they were within 2 or 3 hours' flight away. But then there was nothing normal anymore about Galakrond. Thunder rose in the east. Thunder with an oddly regular pattern. No, not thunder, Malagos finally deduced. Only the beating of very, very large wings. But as the rest of the 5 turned in that direction, the heavens there darkened. A Galakrond, half again as huge as when they had previously seen him, moved ponderously toward the 5. He hacked and coughed every now and then, and each time he did, the aura faded slightly. Malagos took note of that as he rose from his perch. Not for a moment did he think that Galakrond would fall easy prey to them, if defeating him was all possible. However, any potential weakness had to be exploited if there was any hope for the proto-dragons. Confident that the others knew their parts, Malagos flew without hesitation toward Galakrond. The behemoth ceased coughing. The aura returned. Galakrond stared at the puny figures approaching and laughed. The mountains shook at the sound, which would have easily drowned out the smaller cries Malagos and his companions had uttered earlier. Little morsels, he bellowed almost congenially. There you are. The 5 defenders said nothing. They spread out as they approached. My meals grow dry, so dry, Galacron continued merrily. Nasty taste, but I am so hungry. The brutal eyes focused on Malagos. I am always hungry. He exhaled. The 5 had been waiting for such a move. They immediately rose higher in the sky and also separated farther. The noxious mist unloosed by Galacron sped far and wide, but in trying to keep all 5 in range, the misshapen behemoth instead came up short against each. Ysera came closest to being caught at the edge of the mist, but a hard push by the yellow female saved her at the last second. Hiding his relief at her narrow escape, Malagos bore down on Galacron from above. The icy blue proto-dragon opened wide and attacked. The column of frost shot toward the gigantic Galacron, who met the tiny assault in another mocking laugh. At that point, Alexstrasza shot in and grazed a long section of Galacron's torso with flame. Again, the hard hide fire did little. Against the extra eyes, it did much more. They melted like butter. They dissolved like water. They blackened like wood. With expert aim, Alexstrasza destroyed every eye in a broad section of Galacron's left side before it immediately soaring far out of sight. The monstrous proto-dragon roared, but this time in a tone that brought grim pleasure to Malagos and Kalik. Galacron had experienced pain that he had not suffered even against Tyr. I will devour you first, he shouted at the vanishing Alexstrasza. I will savor your life. I will make you one of mine, and then I will devour you again. Malagos could not help shuddering as he continued with this part of attack. All 5 faced the same potential fate, being turned into one of the not living and then having even that existence serve as a bitter but still desired snack. No sooner had Galacron turned to look after Alexstrasza than a column of sand coursed over the other side of his torso. Spread in a much same manner as Alexstrasza's flames, Nosdormu's assault also concentrated whatever extra eyes had grown there. At such velocity, the sand cut like tiny claws, at the very least blinding by irritation, but more often scoring and scratching orbs until no ability for returning sight remained. And as the fire-orange female had done, Nosdormu shot off in another direction. Tyr had made some use of the methods by which proto-dragons fought, but that use had been tempered by his non-proto-dragon mind. Malagos's kind, meaning all families, preferred to hunt alone, but when there was a need to go after very large prey, proto-dragons became adept pack hunters. Packs kept their prey off balance and fought as partners. Tyr had failed in the end because he had chosen to make himself the primary threat against Galacron. The lack of equal coordination between Tyr and the 5 had been the reason for their failure then. Together, Malagos and Alexstrasza had sought to correct that mistake. They only hoped that they had not simply found another path to failure. There would be no third chance. They fought and won here, or they fought and perished here. And if Tyr was correct in one thing, after their destruction, there would be no hope for their world. Concern for more than where his next meal came from was not something Malagos would have ever believed possible for himself. He knew that the others had come to be like him. He feared not only for themselves but for everything. They were even willing to sacrifice their lives if it meant saving their world. Malagos had thus far been the only one of the 3 to remain dangerously near Galacron. He now became the rapidly more infuriated monster's center of attention once again. But Galacron did not exhale, as Malagos had calculated he would. Instead, the Leviathan reached down with both hind paws and ripped away parts of the nearest mountains. He did with such speed that Malagos was only just banking away when the huge chunks of solid earth came hurtling after him. One missile passed Malagos barely a breath later. The icy blue male gritted his teeth as he waited for the second to do the same. Unfortunately, it caught his left wing hard instead. The impact first spun Malagos around. Oh, thanks for stopping by, Kalia. Appreciate it. Have a good night. The impact first spun Malagos around. The agony stirred up nearly forgotten pain from the previous injuries, but that meant little compared with the short, rapid glimpses of Galakrond that the smaller proto-dragon caught while tumbling in the sky. Galakrond took up more and more of his view each time, and yet Malagos could not right himself any faster. Worse, he saw that not only were all four of Galakrond's major paws filled with more dirt and rock, but those extra appendages that Malagos could make out were doing the same. The terrifying behemoth unleashed an immense barrage with only one obvious purpose, ensuring that Calyx's host would not escape destruction. Despite the peril to Malagos, he wondered where Ysera was. She had been set to attack when next Malagos distracted their foe, and regardless of Malagos's own fate, he had expected the others to carry on. But instead of Ysera, it was Neltharion who dived into the fray, ignoring the part of the plan he was supposed to undertake. He shrieked loudly as he neared Galakrond's ear, more loudly, in fact, than Malagos could ever recall the charcoal gray male roaring. The sonic attack literally shook Galakrond, so close had Neltharion dared to get. A storm of rock and earth rained down on the mountains as the misshapen beast involuntarily released his hold on nearly everything. Growing too confident, Neltharion remained to watch his assault a moment longer than sense indicated. For that, he received a hard blow as Galakrond's wings swept forward. Malagos saw their plan collapsing faster than tears. He had thought that he and Alexstrasza understood their own kind better than the two-legged being had. Of course, Galakrond, for all his transformation, was also still a proto-dragon. In some ways, having forgotten that, Malagos wondered if he and his companions had simply flown into certain doom. He started forward to help his rescuer, only to have Alexstrasza fly in before him. Like Ysera, apparently, she had abandoned their strike and retreat plan, but unlike her missing sister, the fire-orange female had not abandoned her comrades any more than Neltharion had. Coming from the side where she had blinded Galakrond by searing away his extra eyes, Alexstrasza raced toward the massive gullet. As she closed, she did what Malagos and Kalik thought looked like a choice of suicide. Alexstrasza briefly roared. It was enough to draw Galakrond's eager attention. Anticipating devouring a tiny morsel, his jaws opened wider. Alexstrasza exhaled, clearly using every bit of breath she had. A huge plume of fire raked over the gargantuan proto-dragon's inner mouth, an area as unprotected as the eyes. The soft flesh near the gullet blackened. Galakrond reared back, all thought of devouring the female proto-dragon gone. Malagos watched, wide-eyed, astounded that their fearsome adversary still had such a tender area. He had thought the region within the maw might be vulnerable, but targeting that had been too much to ask of any of his comrades. What proto-dragon would willingly fly into Galakrond's mouth? Alexstrasza, it seems. Galakrond began to hack and cough. He violently shook his head. His pained roars resounded so loudly in the mountains that it threatened to deafen the others. Wings flapping, he pushed higher into the sky. The hacking and coughing continued as Galakrond swung his head to and fro in an attempt to ease the burning. Alexstrasza continued on to Neltharion, who remained aloft but still suffered visible disorientation. She reached out with her hind paws to take his shoulders and guide him to safety. Over the mountains, Galakrond's cry came to abrupt halt. The hacking and coughing faded a moment after. The malevolent eyes of the huge proto-dragon swept over the vicinity. Although it clearly aggravated his new injuries, Galakrond exhaled long and wide. At the same time, his gaze went beyond Malagos. A sense of foreboding stirred within Malagos, and he hurriedly looked over his shoulder. More than a dozen not living converged from behind him, cutting off that path. Malagos understood then that Galacron had also planned ahead, and with better success. The angle at which the not living flew revealed that they had come from above the cloud cover. Having only found the destroyed corpse, Malagos had assumed that the rest had followed that one into oblivion. Instead, Galacron had at least Malagos, Neltharion, and Alexstrasza trapped between the undead and the will-sapping mist. Nosdormu appeared on Galacron's other blinded side. He assailed the exhaling monster with one sandblast after another, obviously losing himself up, but as aware as Malagos of the dire circumstances. Without turning his head to the brown proto-dragon, Galacron brought up his tail and, with perfect aim, struck Nosdormu hard. Stunned, Nosdormu collided with one peak. Chunks of rock flew free. They dropped in amongst the mountains, accompanied by the limp body of the brown male. And as the tail withdrew, an increasingly frantic Malagos saw that, like the rest of Galacron's macabre form, it had eyes. Eyes that more than made up for those lost to the smaller attackers. Galacron continued his imposingly long exhalation. Malagos retreated backward as the cloying mist closed on him. Alexstrasza, still aiding the disoriented Neltharion, was easily caught up in the mist. She attempted to thrust Neltharion ahead of her, but although he tried to fly harder, it was not enough. A ragged hiss from behind Malagos was his only warning that he had nearly flown into the approaching undead. Calyx's host spun to face the new threat, well aware that doing so also enabled the mist to cut the distance to his victim. A hungry pack of undead, or a fog that would leave him easy prey for their even hungrier master. Malagos anxiously looked back and forth, trying to find some path to freedom. The mist blanketed everything above and below, and the animated corpses blocked all routes ahead. There was nowhere for the icy blue male to fly. And as death encroached from all directions, Malagos and Kalik wondered what had happened to the one missing member of their failed venture. Where was Ysera? Alright, we have 2 more chapters left. Almost done. But not that tonight. Didn't quite make it. But came close. Alright, my voice is starting to die off here now. It's been dying off for about 45 minutes now. You know, for doing this for a number of weeks now, you think I'd be used to talking now, but I'm not. That's kind of weird. Alright. Thank you again for tuning in for these 4 days. We'll be back on Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 p.m. Pacific. Pre-patch for War Within starts this week. Get hyped. We'll be doing some of that until we get bored with it, and then we'll go back to Burning Legion, and then we will, on Sunday, finish off with reading Dawn of the Aspects, and then we will be on to, what is it? Oh. We will be on to, what is the book called? Oh yeah, War of the Scaleborn. That's the next one. We'll be at the end of Dawn of the Aspects, then War of the Scaleborn, because that's right afterwards. Or roughly afterwards, anyway. But yeah, we'll do a night or two of pre-patch. We'll see how long that goes for. See how we feel about that, because, I mean, We only got a glimpse of it and was already broken in beta. So there was not a good idea of how it was supposed to work. How dumb is that? But hopefully it's not going to be broken by the time it actually goes live on Tuesday. Um I'm probably going to be taking a break from some things and actually playing that on my own for me. Maybe recording it, but it's going to be for me. So, I've got characters to get some gear for, so that when War Within drops, we'll start playing it live, but that's not until August 23rd, I think. Let me look at the calendar. August 20th, I think, or the 27th. Somewhere around there. That's when it's supposed to open up, and then we start working on that. Alright, now for the advertising. If you enjoyed the stream, please consider a follow and hitting that notification button. That way you know when we're going to be on. We're normally on Thursday through Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Pacific. Mostly play Warcraft. Sundays are story time. Going through Warcraft books and lore and stuff. And boy, now that I know a lot more stuff, the more pieces I'm filling in on the story, and I don't think they even had the inkling of what they were doing for this one, but I'm starting to see it. Sometimes Twitch does not let you know that I'm on, or if I'm going to be late, or not going to be on, or anything like that. I'm sick. It happens. Please join the Discord, link down below, and exclamation Discord. There you will have the latest notifications from me. We also have other chat rooms. They need some life in there. Please join in. We have a Facebook page, not as active on that as we normally are. We have a YouTube page, link below, exclamation point, YouTube. Right now there's a bunch of VODs on there. I'm working on other videos, recording games and the Overthinking series, but I just need the time to actually do it. The time, the energy, and the brain cells to rub together to do so. It takes a lot of work. Right now it's pretty quiet on there. Please consider joining up on that. Oh yes, I appreciate it, Rain. I do appreciate it. Always need my helpers, my friends. God, do I need them? Anyway, we need to feed the algorithm. More eyes on me when I'm live helps us out because we're still trying to get to affiliate. Well, my Bezo box. I don't want to do this just for the heck of it. I'd actually like to make something out of this. Schedules are subject to be changing after my trip. In 2 weekends, I'm going to be at Gen Con, the best 4 days of tabletop gaming in Indianapolis. I plan to do 1 day there, live streaming at least a little bit. At least, showing things around, just talking, wandering around, get to see the con a little bit. Things like that, depending on how much the lead of the convention center interferes with my connection with my phone. So we'll do our best, but we'll see how it works. But yeah, that's about it here. Thanks again for joining us. Like I said, we'll be back on Thursday night, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 p.m. Pacific, where we'll be doing the War Within pre-patch. Oh boy, I hope this is good. Anyway, take care. Have a good week. We will see you soon. Good night.